Chapter 857. Feng Ling rested in the base for 2 days and didn't see Li Nanheng for 2 days. Boss Li said that he didn't want to see her for 2 days, but she didn't lock herself in the residence for so long. She went to the canteen and the infirmary and saw Dr. Wen's sister, but Li Nanheng was the only one she didn't see. When she saw the red car, she subconsciously thought that Dr. Wen's sister should be a young and flamboyant girl like Qin Shuk. It turned out that she was a 24-year-old woman with fair skin, quiet, very smart and calm, who had graduated from a medical university in France. It was said that she had been working in the largest hospital in Los Angeles. It was rare for her to take a few days off, so she came to the base to see her brother. Because her brother was not feeling well recently and went out to see a doctor, she took his place in the infirmary for a few days. It was because Feng Ling went to the infirmary to get medicine in the past 2 days that she had contact with this Miss Wen twice and felt that she was a very good woman. But last time in the canteen, when the base members mentioned Dr. Wen's sister, they seemed to be gossiping. What was going on? Would such a beautiful, gentle and generous female doctor also have gossip? On the second night of Feng Ling's rest, there was a mission to be carried out in the base as usual. Although it was a small mission, it was said that Boss Li also went. The reason why everyone mentioned Boss Li also went was that he went with an injury. The injury on his arm a few days ago had not healed. This mission lasted for a total of 3 hours. Several terrorists who made trouble in Los Angeles were subdued by the members of 11 Base, and 2 were killed on the spot. It was said that the person who fired the shots was Li Nanheng. Feng Ling heard this from K. After all, she hadn't seen Boss for 2 days, and even the light in the next room hadn't been turned on in these 2 days. The group of people took the helicopter of 11 Base and rushed back to the base. Feng Ling looked at the helicopter over the base from the balcony. When the helicopter landed, she held the railing of the balcony and had an inexplicable impulse in her heart. Boss Li's arm was injured because of her, but from the moment he was injured to now, she had never cared about him. Now he went out with an injury. Even if it was only a skin wound, it was still a flesh wound. Any random movement would pull the wound and it would definitely not heal well. As soon as Li Nanheng left the cabin, he rushed back to his residence to change. The moment he walked downstairs, he suddenly raised his head and looked at Feng Ling on the balcony for a moment. She was wearing the short-sleeved t-shirt that she usually only wore when she was sleeping. Her hair was clean and she looked very obedient. It could be seen that she had rested well for the past 2 days. Her complexion was very good and her condition was very good. However, her eyes were a little blank and no one knew what she was thinking. He looked at her for a moment and didn't say anything. He gave up on the idea of returning to his residence and turned to leave. Seeing that he had left, Feng Ling abruptly returned to her senses. She quickly turned and ran out. She ran down the stairs and hurriedly ran behind him. Because she ran too fast, her breathing was slightly hurried. After a few seconds, she returned to normal. She straightened her body and looked at the tall man in front of her. His eyes were cold. "Boss." Li Nanheng looked at her and asked hoarsely, "Who allowed you to run out of the base dressed like this?" It was a reprimanding tone. It was indifferent. It was as if he hadn't experienced any life-or-death crisis in the 3 hours of the emergency support mission outside. However, his dark eyes showed that he was not in a good mood. Feng Ling tugged at the hem of her white t-shirt. "Boss, I just want to see the wound on your arm. If it hasn't healed, it has nothing to do with you. Go back." At this time, Feng Ling's eyes had already turned to his arm. Although he was wearing a combat uniform, she vaguely felt that his arm posture was not very relaxed. It should still be in pain, or the wound that had not healed well had split open again. She was about to speak when Han Jin came over and asked, "Boss, are you all right? I heard from Fat Tai that it was very dangerous outside just now. Those people kidnapped a lot of people there. When you rushed in to save them, you were more or less injured." Li Nanheng answered mildly, "I'm fine." Han Jin looked at him again. "You're not injured?" His arm movements are not flexible. He used too much force when he was rescuing the hostages. I think his wrist ligaments are strained. I'll go to the infirmary later. It's nothing serious. Ligament strain is not a trivial matter. Hurry up and go have a look. Don't leave any problems. The conversation ended. Li Nanheng left without saying another word to Feng Ling. Han Jin also took a look at Feng Ling and reminded her, "Isn't there a system in the base? You're not allowed to dress too casually outside of your residence. Why did you come out wearing this?" "I'll go back and change right away." Was the injury on Boss's arm very serious? Was that why his arm was stiff? "Shall I follow you to the infirmary?" Feng Ling asked. "No, Boss can go there by himself. Miss Wen is more careful than Dr. Wen." She is more reliable in changing the dressing for boss. You don't have to worry at all. Everything seemed to have returned to peace. Feng Ling looked at the direction in which Li Nanheng and Han Jin left. After watching for a while, she thought about it and felt that it was necessary for her to go over and take a look. After all, these injuries were caused by her. He returned to his residence and put on his jacket and pants. After he was dressed neatly, he rushed to the infirmary. The infirmary. Li Nanheng sat in a chair and put his arm on the table. The woman in a white dress put on a white coat and bent down to carefully examine his wrist and arm. After a while, the woman concluded, "Wrist ligament strain. I'll apply medicine to you first. You can't use too much force in half a month. You have to rest well or it will easily leave sequelae which will be very bad for you to hold a gun in the future. Remember my words, in half a month. Don't use too much force." Li Nanheng frowned. "Half a month is impossible." The woman glared at him. "If you want your hand to be crippled and can't even hold a gun in the future, you can do whatever you want. Can't I do it in a week? How can I bargain with you?" The woman looked incredulous. "Don't you know how badly the wound on your arm was at that time? You hid it from others and the bullet directly grazed your flesh. If it was a little deeper you would have seen the bone. You shouldn't have gone on the mission today. Now you still don't listen to the doctor's words." Li Nanheng was silent for a moment and compromised. "All right, I won't use too much force for the time being, but in some cases I'll think about it later. Your temper is really irresistible. You've been like this since you were a child." Chapter 858. He remembered this woman's voice. She was Dr. Wen's sister. "Don't move. I'm applying medicine for you." The voice inside continued. "Do you have to be so meticulous? Nonsense. First, you are injured like this and then your ligaments are strained. If you don't pay attention your arm will be useless." Li Nanheng looked at the woman who was carefully applying medicine for him, sat there expressionlessly, and let her apply medicine. He looked indifferent and didn't say anything more. "Forget it. You must control the strength of this arm in the short term. If you sprain or strain it again, you must come to me as soon as possible." Li Nanheng snorted. "I know. I'm not a child. You don't have to remind me like this. You were easier to talk to when you were a child. The older you get, the more difficult it is to talk to you." The woman said as she applied medicine on his arm and then straightened up. In the past few hours, Li Nanheng had indeed overexerted his physical strength. In addition, he hadn't had a good rest these days. It was rare for him to sit here quietly and rest for a while, but he heard the woman nagging beside him. He closed his eyes and didn't speak anymore. While resting, he let her take the gauze and bandage it again. "Didn't the Li family ask you to go back? Why do you still insist on staying in 11 base?" After the female doctor bandaged his wound, she used her hand to gently massage his wrist to help him soothe his strained ligaments. Li Nanheng closed his eyes and didn't answer until he suddenly felt a tingling pain on his wrist. He opened his eyes and saw that the woman deliberately increased her strength. Obviously she was abusing him. He immediately withdrew his hand and said lightly, "Shaoqing, when will your brother come back? He has been away from the base for too long this time." Wen Liqing raised her eyebrows and looked at him, and then at his arm and smiled lightly. "What? Why are you so anxious to let my brother come back? If he doesn't come back I will be the base doctor here. Isn't it the same? After all, you are a woman and the members of the base are all men. It is not convenient for you to live here alone." "Why not? You are here, aren't you? This infirmary is my brother's territory. Who dares to do anything to me?" Wen Liqing said as she reached out to grab his arm. "Don't hide. I am massaging you." "No need." Li Nanheng avoided her hand and sat in place. His expression remained calm. "Isn't the medicine ready? Give me the medicine. I'll change it myself starting tomorrow." Wen Liqing's hand, which was about to reach out, paused. She looked at him, withdrew her hand and stood by the table. "You don't have to be so polite to me." Wen Liqing and Li Nanheng were the same age. Although the Wen family was not as powerful as the Li family, they had known each other since they were very young and had known each other for many years. Plus Dr. Wen's relationship with Li Nanheng in the base, Wen Liqing often had dealings with Li Nanheng because of her brother, whether she was still a student or had graduated. On the surface, Wen Liqing called him by his name or Mr. Li, but in private she called him Nanheng. Later she called him Little Li Li and Little Heng Heng. Although Li Nanheng never talked to her, she was still used to calling him like this. Anyway, he would not be angry with her. As time went by, the members of the base heard rumors that there should be something between Boss Li and Dr. Wen's sister. Even if Boss Li was indifferent every day, Dr. Wen's sister obviously had feelings for Boss Li, Otherwise, why would she come here so often? Besides, she had now graduated from the medical school and was definitely an unreachable doctor in the largest hospital in Los Angeles. However, she liked to come to 11 base when she was on vacation and would rather be a base doctor who bandaged some wounds every day. Fortunately, there was a rule in the base that the family members of the base were allowed to visit each year. Otherwise, Miss Wen might really plan to live here. Feng Ling stood outside the door for a while. The door of the infirmary was not closed very tightly. When she turned her head to approach, she could see the two people inside through the gap in the door. She saw Miss Wen forcibly pull up Li Nanheng's arm and massage his wrist with her hand. The doctor in the white dress was clean and beautiful. She had light makeup on her face and a thin layer of lipstick. As she massaged Li Nanheng's face, she said, "You should learn from my brother. He graduated from a medical university like me, but in order to enjoy life, he doesn't like to see so many people in the hospital and would rather stay in this 11 base. In fact, I think the salary here is higher than in the hospital, and it's so relaxing every day. How nice it is. In fact, I don't think it's necessary to force yourself so hard in life. If you like to live a comfortable life, you can live slowly and comfortably. As long as you are happy and relaxed, you don't have to make yourself like a tight spring. How tiring is that? And I heard from my brother that most of the other members of the base come here to see him because of the high intensity of training, muscle strain, or heat stroke. Only you, who seems to be fine, are the first to rush forward in any dangerous mission. You are injured here and there, and when your injury is healed, you continue to be injured. Do you really not see yourself as a human being? Do you think you are made of iron?" It was very late now. When Li Nanheng came back from a mission, it was already midnight, and now it was past midnight. Late at night, the base was silent. The young base general and the young female doctor shared the same room. No matter how you looked at it, they seemed to be a good match. Feng Ling changed her clothes in a hurry, and her short hair was a bit messy and stuck to her forehead and ears. She was neither a man nor a woman, and compared to the beautiful female doctor inside, it was like the difference between clouds and mud. Xiao Su said that Boss Li liked her. In this way. How could he like her? Perhaps it was just gossip in private. Nowadays, men would always be misunderstood because of some ambiguous situations between men. Xiao Su must have misunderstood. Feng Ling stood outside the door and saw the man who was usually as cold as ice sitting on the chair by the table tiredly with his eyes closed. From his expression, she could see that he was a bit relaxed. He was completely relieved to leave himself to this beautiful doctor, letting her hand apply medicine oil on his wrist from time to time and keep massaging it, and so on. From the tone of this Miss Wen, they should be very familiar with each other, and this very familiar relationship had been maintained for many years. Chapter 859. When Leching seemed to hear something, suddenly turned her eyes, and saw the figure standing outside the door. She looked up and asked in surprise, "You are?" The next second he noticed the black uniform on the man's back and couldn't help but laugh. "Since you are a member of the base, just come in and talk. You don't have to be afraid to come in because your boss is here. He is just a patient here and I treat him equally." After speaking, when Liqing glanced at Feng Ling, "Who are you? Feng Ling, right? I remember you." How could Wen Liqing not remember the thinnest and smallest person in the base who was as beautiful as a woman? Hearing her words, the man who was about to fall asleep on the chair suddenly opened his eyes and looked toward the door. Feng Ling subconsciously took a step back. Li Nanheng said indifferently, "Since you are here, why are you standing outside?" Feng Ling raised her hand awkwardly and touched her slightly messy hair. Since she had been discovered, there was nothing to hide, so she pushed the door open and walked in. The infirmary was air-conditioned and clean and tidy. There were several rooms in the room, all of which were places for medicine and medical equipment. When Liqing continued to massage Li Nanheng's wrist and said to Feng Ling with a smile, "Take a seat first. I'll take a look at little Li's wrist after I treat it. What's wrong with you today? Are you still sore and uncomfortable like 2 days ago?" "Little Li?" Hearing this address and this tone, Feng Ling, who had just walked to their side, paused. She looked at Wen Liqing and nodded. "Miss Wen, I'm fine. I just came to see boss's injury." Her eyes moved to Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng glanced at her coldly. "Why didn't you go back to rest but came to the infirmary? Are you very free?" She stood in place, hesitated for a moment and said, "I heard that you were seriously injured last time, and just now I heard that your wrist ligament was strained, so I came to have a look." Li Nanheng's expression was indifferent. "Now you see it?" Feng Ling looked at the area on his wrist that had just been wrapped with gauze. There was still some blood seeping out of the white gauze. It could be seen that it had not healed previously and had split open again during the mission today. There was a lot of blood and it was still oozing out. She should have known it when Li Nanheng had shielded her from the bullets in the bar, but it had been urgent at that time, and she had been in a hurry to return to the base to change clothes. She hadn't had the chance to see what had happened after that. She hadn't expected it to be so serious. However, he didn't say anything. Even when Miss Wen criticized him for his injuries, he didn't explain anything. It was obvious that he didn't take this matter seriously. If you're done, you can go. Li Nanheng withdrew his gaze and said in a cold tone. Wen Liqing knew what kind of temper Li Nanheng had. Sometimes it was not too much to call him an iceberg. But no matter how he treated the members of the base, he didn't seem to be so cold and distant. She turned to look at Feng Ling, who was standing there not knowing whether to stay or leave. She suddenly let go of Li Nanheng's hand and went over to hold Feng Ling's hand. Come here. Let me check your hand first. No, Miss Wen, I'm much better. I just felt weak 2 days ago and was urged by the brothers in the team to come and have a look. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to disturb you 2 days ago. Feng Ling was about to push her hand away, but Wen Liqing secretly winked at Feng Ling, meaning that Li Nanheng needed to be quiet now and Feng Ling should cooperate with him, lest she annoyed their boss again. Feng Ling paused, and Wen Liqing took the opportunity to pull her to sit down at the table. Li Nanheng closed his eyes again and lay back in the chair. Wen Liqing touched Feng Ling's hand and said with a strange look, "It's really strange. You are a man, but your hand is whiter than mine and a little smaller than mine." As she spoke, she turned Feng Ling's hand over as if studying a strange treasure. Seeing the thin calluses on Feng Ling's palm, she said with a distressed look, "Such a beautiful hand, but there are some thin calluses on your palm. Fortunately, they are not too thick. If you take good care of them for a long time, they will disappear soon." With that, Wen Liqing took out a hand cream from the drawer beside her desk. "Take it back and apply it for a few days. Let's see if the thin calluses on your palms will slowly soften. Such beautiful hands, I feel uncomfortable looking at the slightest blemish." Feng Ling put the hand cream back on the table and said seriously, "Thank you, Miss Wen, but I don't need these. Besides, I am a man. It doesn't matter if my hand is beautiful or not." "You're right." Wen Liqing smiled. "But you're a man, but you're so good looking. I'm really curious about how beautiful your parents are. I've never seen a boy more beautiful than a girl like you, and I've never seen anyone more beautiful than you on TV." It was not the first time that she was praised by a woman. Last time it was Qin Shuk and this time it was Wen Liqing. Feng Ling smiled faintly. In fact, she had nothing to say, but in the eyes of others she seemed to be shy. Seeing that Feng Ling was so shy, Wen Liqing didn't say anything more. She just smiled, took her hand to check it for her and then picked up the stethoscope. As soon as Feng Ling saw the stethoscope, she stood up. "I really don't need to check it. Since Boss Li's arm is fine, I'll go back first. It's getting late. Good night." With that, she was about to leave. Wen Liqing looked at her in surprise. "Feng Ling, what's wrong with you? Last time when you came to the infirmary for a checkup, I wanted to use the stethoscope, but you avoided me and refused to be touched. Now you are avoiding me again. Although I am a woman, I am a doctor. I just lifted your clothes and pressed it against your body to listen to your stethoscope. Why did you?" Feng Ling has a strange habit. He doesn't like to be touched. Don't worry about him. As long as he doesn't die soon, just let him be." Li Nanheng's voice came from the other side. The man was still leaning against the back of the chair with his back to them. The air around him was cold and his voice was cold. Chapter 860. Her words made Feng Ling even more silent. She looked up at Wen Liqing. Dr. Wen's sister could really be described as generous, elegant, kind, and beautiful. But what she didn't understand was when she and Boss Li needed another person to explain for her or even to ease the deadlock between her and Boss Li. She didn't like the current deadlock, but she really didn't know how to break it. The light in the infirmary poured down from above and shone on Wen Liqing's spotless white dress. The two of them, one in black and the other in white, were completely different. Wen Liqing was wearing a fitted dress and an angelic doctor's white coat. Her long hair was neatly tied behind her head, and her eyebrows were curved. Her lips were full and beautiful, like a blooming flower in the sun. But what about her? Feng Ling's hand hanging on her waist moved and touched the hem of her uniform that was not particularly neat because she was in a hurry. Her closet was full of uniforms of the same size and color, and there were all kinds of white or black t-shirts that she would wear when sleeping. She was exactly the same as the other men in the base. Except for clothes, she only wore pants, which were loose and fat without a waist. Even her own hair was pitifully short. She wore no makeup. Her hair was messy. Feng Ling had never felt that there was anything wrong with being a man, but at this moment, standing in front of such a perfect woman, she really felt a little ashamed. Bosley was obviously injured because of her, but he had to come to this female doctor to bandage his wound, and he could even be so relaxed in front of Miss Wen. Feng Ling wanted to say something. She wanted to say that Bosley was actually really good. As long as Bosley really cared about someone, how could he be as cold as ice? In fact, he also had a gentle side. None of them knew. When Li Nanheng dragged her out of the bathroom, pressed her against the wall, and bent down to kiss her, it seemed that he was forcefully pressing her, but in fact he covered her body tightly from head to toe, not allowing outsiders to overdo it. When Li Nanheng pulled her into his arms to protect her from the gunshot in the private room, how tight his hands were on her back. No one would know this kind of gentleness. In an instant, certain scenes surged through his mind. Those words lingered on her lips for a long time, but in the end she just turned to Li Nanheng's back and said, "Boss, you must cooperate with the doctor to treat your injury. I'll go back first." She turned around and walked away quickly. Feng Ling hurriedly walked out of the infirmary, but she didn't know that after she left, when she ran around the building to the training ground, Li Nanheng's gaze swept to the window. When Liqing walked back and was about to pull his wrist again to continue massaging, but the man expressionlessly avoided her hand. When she was about to pull him again, he frowned, obviously impatient. When Liqing raised her eyebrows because of his sudden change of expression. "What are you doing? I haven't even cleaned off the medicinal oil on my hands." Li Nanheng sat there without saying a word, staring at the people who hurriedly left the training ground. The black uniform she was wearing today was not the zipper style, but the button style. One of the buttons at the front was crooked, causing the whole row of buttons to be out of place. However, the bottom of the uniform was indeed difficult to notice if one did not look carefully. Her hair was messy and she was obviously in a hurry to come over when she was putting on her clothes. As she walked quickly, she raised her hand to comb her messy hair until her hair obediently stuck to her forehead, and then she continued to walk faster. When Liqing also looked out and saw that Feng Ling had gone far away, she immediately smiled and said, "I'm almost tired of looking at the group of men in your base. Only Feng Ling looks a little interesting." "What's interesting about him?" The man looked out of the window indifferently, his voice cold and indifferent. When Liqing smiled. "When I first saw Feng Ling, I always suspected that he was a woman, but later I found out that he was not. But if he is really a girl, I think he will be very beautiful. It's a pity that he is so beautiful. How can he marry a wife in the future? He must be very picky. After all, it will be difficult for him to find a woman more beautiful than himself." Li Nanheng snorted coldly. "How did you find out that he is not a woman?" When Liqing turned to look at him again. After a few seconds she realized what he meant and said, "Of course not. 2 days ago Qiao Fei came to help him get the medicine. Qiao Fei said that Feng Ling was so tired that he didn't even have the strength to lift his arms. It was he who forced him to apply the medicine to Feng Ling. This medicine should be applied to his limbs, chest and back. If Feng Ling was really a woman, how could Qiao Fei apply medicine to him like this?" Li Nanheng raised his eyes and slowly looked at Wen Liqing coldly. "Qiao Fei?" "Yes, Qiao Fei's parents are also friends with our Wen family. I've always been very familiar with him. He always says what he says. He also said that Feng Ling's body is so thin that he doesn't look like he has been training in the base for a long time. No wonder Feng Ling doesn't dare to show others his body. He is really too thin to show others his body. He also said that Feng Ling may be born with this kind of physique. No matter how many years of training, he can't grow much muscle." As when Liqing spoke, she leaned over and whispered to Li Nanheng. Qiao Fei also said that he didn't expect that Feng Ling, as thin and small as Boss Li, could be on par with Feng Ling and could exchange at least a dozen rounds with him. His small body had great explosive power, which made him particularly curious about Feng Ling. When Liqing said again, "When I touched Feng Ling's hand just now, I really felt that it was so white and tender. A man is so beautiful and white that even women are jealous of him. Do you think God made him reincarnate into the wrong body?" When Liqing originally wanted to say something but saw that Li Nanheng's eyes were looking out of the window and did not move for a long time. Feng Ling had clearly left. What was he still looking at? When Liqing didn't say more and just thought that he was tired. She forcibly pulled his hand over and rubbed it. Then she picked up a small bottle of medicinal oil and poured it on his wrist, rubbing it back and forth. Li Nanheng looked out of the window at the dark night with a serious expression. In the dark of the night, he could not see that figure on the training ground. Was there something wrong with his senses? Or was that pair of silicone gel really so real? If it was really a man, there was no smile on Li Nanheng's handsome face, and he even wondered if he had accidentally turned gay, thinking of Feng Ling's expression as if she clearly wanted to say something but didn't speak. He only felt a sour feeling in his chest. Chapter 861. Monday. After training, Xiao Fei asked everyone to go back to change their clothes. Taking advantage of Fatty's birthday, the sniper team and Team 1 would have a dinner party tonight. She didn't expect that Fat Tai, who had always liked to go against Feng Ling and Team 1, would take the opportunity of his birthday to give them a rare holiday. They could enjoy a good day of eating to their heart's content. The members of both teams were overjoyed. They came down from the horizontal bars and quickly ran back to their residences. All of them tidied themselves up. The reason was that Dr. Wen's sister would be going to the dinner party today. It was rare for a woman to appear in the base, and it was said that Dr. Wen's sister had brought 2 female interns with her. With 3 women around, these single men who couldn't even find a female mosquito in the base were very excited. After changing clothes, Tam asked, "Hey, by the way, isn't Boss Lee's arm injured? Is he still going?" Xiao Fei said, "I just called and asked. He said he won't go and told us to go and have fun by ourselves." Kay immediately cheered heartily by the side. After cheering, he didn't forget to put on an act. "Boss won't go? How can that be? Without him we will have no backbone." "Tam, that's right. I can't even drink happily." Lin Qing, "Without Boss Lee's cold eyes, I may not be able to control myself." "Ayaya, Lei Peng, if Boss is not here my body is very itchy. There is no one to manage me." Xiao Fei sneered and patted their heads. "Stop pretending. Are you unhappy that no one cares about you? That's right. At least there are 3 girls today. Although Miss Wen has an affair with our boss, there are still 2 other interns who haven't graduated yet, right? I heard that female students studying medicine are very hot-tempered. I happen to like this type of girl. If boss is here it's not convenient for me to pick up girls. If he glares at me I will immediately be afraid." Lin Qing chuckled. "That's right. Without boss there is no one to control us. We are not afraid of being scolded. Without Boss Lee no one told them to drink less. No one reminded them what if they had a mission at night? There was also no one who said that alcohol was the most taboo during physical training and strictly told everyone to drink at most 3 bottles. Boss wasn't here tonight, which meant that he could drink wine, eat meat and flirt with women if he wanted." Feng Ling hesitated for a moment and secretly said to Xiao Fei, "Deputy Drill Master Xiao, I won't go tonight." Xiao Fei took a look at her, and Kay immediately put his arm around Feng Ling's shoulder to say, "Why don't you go? Are you going to stay in the base to accompany boss?" Kay was just joking, but Xiao Fei looked at Feng Ling. Feng Ling said indifferently, "I'm not used to this kind of lively occasion. Last time, when we welcomed boss back, I was already tortured by you guys. If you come up with any tricks this time, I definitely won't cooperate. Wouldn't it ruin our family's mood? Besides, I don't drink much, so I might as well stay in the base and sleep for 3 more hours. Come on. If you want to accompany boss, just say so. Anyway, boss said that he won't go tonight, so he definitely won't go." Kay put his arm around her shoulder. Feng Ling did not explain further and only responded with an N. "Xiao Fei. You really won't go?" "No." With that, Feng Ling turned to Kay who was holding her. "By the way, I have something to ask you." "What is it?" "You just said that Miss Wen and Boss Lee have an affair." Kay immediately looked at her with an expression of, "It's not easy, Feng Ling, you finally understand." "What? Are you jealous?" Feng Ling rolled her eyes at him. "Don't make wild guesses. I haven't paid much attention to Dr. Wen and his sister in the past few years, so I'm not very clear about their situation in the base. Also, what's going on between boss and Miss Wen you just mentioned?" Kay raised his eyebrows. "What else can it be? It's just something between a man and a woman." It was because Feng Ling didn't understand the things between a man and a woman that she asked. This Kay now he was deliberately keeping her guessing. Seeing him doing this deliberately, Feng Ling simply stopped asking. "You can go. I'm going back." "Hey, why are you going? We haven't finished talking yet." Kay reached out and put his arm around her shoulder to pull her back, lowered his head and whispered in her ear, "You should have heard of the Li family status in the Chinese community in the United States. So in the United States, as long as the family conditions are good and influential in the upper class, they usually have some contact with the Li family, including our deputy drill master Qiao's family. I heard that Miss Wen and our boss Li went to the same kindergarten when they were very young and later grew up together, but our boss came to the base very early, so he and Miss Wen can only be regarded as childhood friends. They should have kept in touch occasionally over the years, and Miss Wen often comes to the base because of her brother, so she is very familiar with our boss." Kay took a look at Feng Ling who was calm and emotionless. "But something happened the year before you came to the base. At that time I had just come to the base. The secret entrance behind 11 base was bombed by terrorists. Miss Wen happened to be in the base at that time and was injured by the explosion. She was in a coma for several days, and Boss stayed by her side for a few days until Miss Wen woke up. So the brothers in the base all think that there should be a deep relationship between Boss and Miss Wen, but in fact we didn't see anything between Boss and Miss Wen with our own eyes. Boss is usually very cold to others, but he stayed by Miss Wen's side for several days, so it should be similar to what we guessed. But it has been almost 4 years. Time really flies. Not to mention me, even you have been in the base for more than 3 years. Kay smiled and held her. You will be 18 in 10 months, right? At that time, our brothers in the base will do a good job for you. No, there are many people in their teens and 20s in this base. Who would have a big birthday party? There's no need to be so high profile. I'll go back first. Nonsense. Look at Fat Tai. When he heard that Dr. Wen was going to bring 2 interns over, he was so excited that he directly held a big birthday party on his birthday. Even that damn fatty can do it. How can our Feng Ling be worse than him? When the time comes, you don't have to pay for it. Brothers will do it for you. Feng Ling rolled her eyes at him. All right, you. Hurry up and go pick up your girls. You speak as if without Fatty's treat, you will have a chance to meet the interns brought by Miss Wen. Chapter 862. Having just sent Kay and the others away, Feng Ling was about to go to the training ground to get something before returning to her residence when she saw Han Jin passing by from a distance. She greeted Han Jin and was about to turn around, but when Han Jin saw her, he asked, Hey? Feng Ling, you didn't go out? Drill Master Han. Feng Ling nodded to him. I'm not interested in lively occasions, so I didn't go. Han Jin smiled. That's good. The wound on Boss's arm needs to be changed later. Go to the infirmary to get the medicine for him, and I'll go out with the boys of Team 1. This will save time. Has Boss's arm not recovered yet? Feng Ling asked. Seeing that Han Jin didn't respond, she added, I mean, doesn't Miss Wen massage and apply medicine for him every day? This way I should be able to recover soon. Han Jin raised his eyebrows. How can she massage and apply medicine every day? Since Boss was injured, he hasn't gone to the infirmary more than 3 times. Twice, we urged him to go because we were worried that his wound would get infected. In the next 2 days, Xiao Su and I went to get the medicine, and Boss changed the medicine alone in the room. Besides, it's impossible for Boss to love Miss Wen. As the words were on the tip of his tongue, he suddenly braked. He took a closer look at Feng Ling, who seemed to have no fluctuations in her eyes. Thinking about it, Feng Ling had been in the base for many years. She didn't ask much about anything and was not interested in anyone or anything. Her heart was as still as water, as if she had no emotions. But now, it was rare for her to listen to someone's words. Besides, when Boss went to the infirmary that night, Feng Ling seemed to have followed him. Han Jin suddenly let out a long sigh. Well, alas, how should I say this? Feng Ling thought he just said that Boss's injury had not recovered, but he suddenly changed his tone. What's wrong? Alas, I don't know how to tell you. Just say it. Feng Ling looked at him and could hear the hidden meaning in his words. Han Jin shook his head and sighed. In fact, Miss Wen is really good, but Boss seems to have an unresolved engagement at home. Secondly, he doesn't have much interest in Miss Wen. He simply treats her as Dr. Wen's younger sister or friend. Miss Wen's current state is like a falling flower, but a heartless river. Thinking about it makes my heart ache. Feng Ling looked up at him. Boss Lee, you don't like Miss Wen? Han Jin continued. Yes, we also think that Boss should like her. As the saying goes, it's easy for a woman to pursue a man. Boss Lee's tenderness will be melted by Miss Wen's tenderness sooner or later. I think Miss Wen is also very patient. She knows that Boss Lee doesn't like to make the relationship between friends too complicated, so she has been quietly accompanying him as a friend. I think if she continues to persevere like this, sooner or later she may become Mrs. Lee. Feng Ling expressionlessly turned her eyes to the things in the training ground and did not speak. Han Jin gripped her shoulders sternly. Feng Ling, I'm telling you, don't tell Boss and Miss Wen what I just said. When you go to the infirmary to get the medicine, don't ask too much. When you're applying medicine for Boss, just be quiet and don't talk too much. Don't sow discord between them, understand? All right, I won't talk nonsense, Feng Ling said in a low voice. Then you must be careful. We are still waiting for Miss Wen to become Mrs. Lee. Han Jin seemed to be a little excited. There are not many people who can be treated with patience by Boss, and Miss Wen is one of them. This kind of good fate should be cherished, don't you think so? Yes. Feng Ling's tone was still calm. Boss is usually very cold to others, and he is indeed very patient with Miss Wen, unlike us. Usually when we call him, he doesn't respond at all. Seeing her stubborn attitude, Han Jin immediately became anxious and slapped his thigh. Oh, that's right. Don't say that boss is usually impatient with others. In all these years, boss has never rushed forward to block a bullet for anyone. Feng Ling raised her head in surprise. Han Jin smiled and mysteriously leaned close to her ear. In fact, sometimes patience is equal to politeness, politeness is equal to alienation, and alienation is equal to no relationship. In fact, boss's attitude toward both internal and external has always been very obvious. It's just that there is a blockhead in our base who has never been enlightened. After hearing this, Feng Ling looked at him as if she didn't understand. Where did this blockhead come from? Han Jin? His head hurt. Suddenly he understood why boss was angry every day. If this guy was a woman, perhaps he could directly throw her on the bed to solve the problem. But now even if he wanted to throw her on the bed, it seemed that there seemed to be other more important problems to solve. For example, between the two men, who was on the top and who was on the bottom. By the way, I find that boss seems to be particularly displeased with you recently. Do you want to ease the relationship with boss? Han Jin asked again. Feng Ling raised her eyes. Yes. I have a few bottles of wine in my room that I have collected for several years. Usually alcohol is not allowed in the base, so I have kept them until now. As he spoke, he handed her the key to his residence. Make him drink 2 bottles of wine tonight. See if it can solve the conflict. Why should I make him drink to solve the conflict? You don't understand. Men need to talk in an atmosphere. When they are sober, they probably won't even let out a fart. When they drink too much, it's easy to know what boss is thinking. Listen to me, take the wine and go to the canteen to ask for a few dishes. Boss probably won't accept the wine and dishes I send to him. I don't care whether he will accept it or not. It's up to him whether he accepts it or not. It's better than being in a stalemate like this and training you like a machine every day, isn't it? Han Jin said and patted her on the shoulder. Believe me, as long as you have the ability to get boss drunk, you can solve a lot of doubts in your heart. But what? Do you have to lie on the training ground every night tired like a cow? If I give you a chance, just do it. Do you think boss can escape from your palm when he is drunk? Feng Ling. Inexplicably, she felt that Han Jin's words had another meaning. But she didn't understand what exactly it meant and just looked at him in confusion. Seeing Feng Ling's confused look, Han Jin made another big move. Come on, let me give you another advice. Didn't you wear women's clothes to go on a mission last time? You change into women's clothes and go to boss. When boss sees you like that, he won't be cruel to you. Chapter 863. Han Jin winked at her and looked at her with a look that said, everything is in silence. He cheered for her one last time and then walked away. Feng Ling. Late at night, most of the people of Team 1 and the 4 snipers all went out. The training ground and the building where Team 1 and the sniper team lived were the closest. At this moment, the surroundings were clean and empty. Feng Ling took Han Jin's key to get a few bottles of wine from him and then went to the base's cafeteria to order a few dishes. Then she carried them back. However, she didn't change into women's clothes. After all, it was completely unnecessary. Besides, the clothes that Xiao Su bought for her last time had already been thrown away and destroyed. She didn't have any women's clothes or supplies in her room. When she returned to her residence with these things because there was no one in the corridor, it felt empty. Only the moonlight at night shone in, illuminating the floor. Feng Ling stepped on the moonlight and walked to the floor where she and Li Nanheng lived. She didn't really want to do anything according to Han Jin's instructions. However, after Boss Li blocked a bullet for her last time, she really realized that the so-called high-risk missions were really different from the missions she had taken on before. As newcomers, most of the missions they came into contact with were criminal gangs or gangsters. Although guns and explosives were essential, they were relatively easy to deal with. As long as they reacted quickly, had a bit of intelligence and cooperated with their teammates, there usually wouldn't be any problems. However, since she entered the base, it was the first time she had directly faced terrorists, and it was said that those terrorists weren't too difficult to deal with. They were just a branch that had been kicked out. In other words, in the base, whether now or in the future, there would only be more dangerous missions. The so-called sacrifice that others spoke of seemed to be getting closer and closer to her. In the past, she had made plans for all the possibilities in the base, but she didn't expect that when she was in danger, Boss Li would rush over to protect her in his arms. Even though she was forced to train on the training ground that night, even though she was so tired that she almost fainted, a thought kept echoing in her mind. If Boss Li didn't rush over to protect her at that time, would she have been the one injured? David pointed his gun directly at her head. If she couldn't dodge in time, she would probably be a lonely soul now. If Boss had dodged the bullet while hugging her, if the bullet hadn't only hit his arm, but hit his back or some other vital part, and if Boss had died trying to save her, it would have been a different scene. What if she and Boss had been left behind in the bar that day? Feng Ling had never been afraid of anything, but after that day, some kind of lingering fear that she couldn't understand had been entangling her heart, pressing down on her. Often when she woke up from her dreams, she couldn't breathe, and her mind was filled with the scene of Li Nanheng holding her tightly in his arms. It was already past 8 o'clock at night. She paced back and forth for several minutes, glancing at the closed door from time to time. Earlier, when she came out, she had noticed the lights on the balcony next door and was certain that Boss was inside right now. "Boss, you're right. Boss, you're right." She lifted the bag in her hand and took a deep breath. It had been a few days. Boss Lee didn't care about her at all and was extremely harsh. It was rare for him to pass by her in the base, but he didn't even look at her. She didn't need to be responsible for the injury on his arm, but she couldn't let this go on forever. Feng Ling recalled everything that had happened before Boss got angry at her. Everything that had happened in the bar, and the scene when he forced her to take off her clothes after returning. Also, he had asked her again and again if she thought she was an honest person. This cold point made Feng Ling feel uneasy. She had to break this cold point as soon as possible. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to maintain a good state in the base. With this thought in mind, she stepped on the voice-controlled lights and walked to the door of Li Nanheng's room. In the empty corridor, every time she walked a short distance, the overhead lights would turn on. The ground was dim. She stood at the door and saw the bright light coming through the crack of the door. She secretly guessed what Boss was doing inside, took 2 deep breaths and raised her hand to knock on the door. Bang, bang, bang. The 3 bangs were particularly abrupt in the quiet corridor. A man's voice came from inside the room. "Who is it?" His voice was low, cold, and unorganized, like an endless sea in the middle of the night, so cold and deep that one couldn't see the bottom. Feng Ling's hand holding the bag tightened. "It's me." There was a moment of silence inside, and then footsteps approached the door and stopped. Li Nanheng asked indifferently, "What are you doing here?" He didn't even open the door and ask directly. Feng Ling carried the bag and said bluntly, "Drill Master Han gave me a few bottles of wine before he left. It's boring for me to drink alone. Anyway, I live with Boss, so I came to drink with Boss." The people in the room fell silent, and this kind of silence made Feng Ling shiver inexplicably outside the door. After a moment, the door was opened. The bright light poured out from inside and Feng Ling looked up at the man inside. Li Nanheng had nothing to do tonight, so he didn't go out to drink with them. Obviously, he thought he didn't need to see anyone tonight. In the room, he wore a white vest and a pair of black shorts. His hair was also wet and there were water drops on his shoulders. Was Boss taking a shower just now? Feng Ling asked subconsciously. No wonder she didn't hear the sound in his room when she stayed in the corridor. It turned out that he was in the bathroom. Li Nanheng didn't answer and glanced at the bag in her hand. "What wine do you want to drink? Who allowed you to drink at the base? If you want to drink, just go out with them. The base clearly states that you are not allowed to drink." Feng Ling raised the things in her hand. "It was given to me by Drill Master Han. Boss, you know I can't hold my liquor well. Even if he gave it to me, I can't drink it, so I sent it to you. These wines are at your disposal. You can keep them or throw them away. I won't stop you." Li Nanheng looked at her condescendingly. "Why did Han Jin give you the wine? He has hidden them for so many years. I asked him for a bottle, but he was reluctant to give me one. Today he gave them all to you?" Feng Ling, there was such a thing? Then she really didn't know. However, when she went to Han Jin's room just now, she really saw a lot of wine in the cabinet. She only took 4 of them and then put the others neatly before coming out. She didn't know there was such a thing. She couldn't just say that Drill Master Han asked her to come over and get Boss drunk, could she? "Boss, move aside. The dishes are getting cold," Feng Ling said as she raised her hand to push him. She patted his chest and walked inside. The man had just taken a shower and was only wearing a vest. The vest was very thin, and the firm feeling under her hand made her heart tremble. As though she was scalded, she retracted her hand and quickly walked in. Chapter 864. Feng Ling placed the 2 plastic bags on the table in his room and began to take things out. As she took them out, she reported to him. "This is the specialty of Auntie Jelly in the base cafeteria. I specially packed one. And this is the fried chicken made by Uncle Han. By the way, this is brought to you by Auntie Jelly. She said that although you don't go to the cafeteria often, you eat this every time, so I brought it to you." She said that she learned this kind of braised meat from a chef in northern China several years ago. It's rare to have such authentic taste in Los Angeles. And steak. After reporting, Feng Ling placed the lunch boxes on the table one by one with satisfaction, took out the bottles of wine, put them on the table and turned around to speak. As soon as she turned around, she suddenly bumped into the man's chest. Feng Ling paused and hurriedly took a step back, but her back had been pressed against the edge of the table. She raised her eyes and looked at Li Nanheng, who suddenly approached her. The man looked down at her panicked expression at this moment. Feng Ling usually wore a calm and indifferent mask. She rarely showed such a panicked expression, but every time she showed such an expression, the man's heart seemed to be bitten by mosquitoes. Why did you bring so much wine and food here? Isn't Fatty's birthday today? But they said that you won't go out today, so I didn't go either. Thinking that Team 1 and the sniper team rarely have peace, I went to the cafeteria to buy some dishes and wanted to eat with you, boss. Feng Ling said and moved back, put her hands on the table, and tried to keep a safe distance from the man who was full of pressure in front of her. Li Nanheng glanced at the delicious food on the table behind her and said lightly, "What's the matter with the wine? Didn't I just say that Drill Master Han asked me to? What did he say to you?" "Nothing. Drill Master Han just asked me to go to his place to get a few bottles of wine." "Get wine?" The man looked down at the boy who had been faintly moving back but had no way to retreat and said coldly, "What is he thinking? Does he think I don't know? He wants to get me drunk, en?" Feng Ling. The man's oppressive aura became more and more obvious. Feng Ling abruptly raised her hand to push him away but failed to do so. Her hand paused stiffly on the man's body before she stiffly put it down. "Boss, I'm just giving you a few bottles of wine and some dishes out of goodwill. It's not that complicated." With that, she clenched her fists tightly and pushed him hard. Just as she pushed the man away by an arm's length, she instantly turned around to leave the dangerous area in front of him. However, just as she flashed over, her arms suddenly tightened. The man directly held her, looking at her from the corner of his eye. "Aren't we going to eat together? Why are you running?" Feng Ling paused and tried to pull her hand out of his grasp but failed. She met the man's indifferent gaze. "Yes, but boss, can you let go of me first?" As she spoke, she glanced at his arm again. "Didn't the doctor say that you shouldn't use too much strength in this arm for the time being? Otherwise there will be sequelae." However, precisely because he was using his injured hand, Feng Ling did not dare to use too much strength to break free. She could only let him hold her wrist firmly and stood stiffly by the side. Originally, she was the one who took the initiative to run over, but because Li Nanheng exposed her motive and knew that she wanted to get him drunk, she did not have the courage to look into his eyes. Li Nanheng took a deep look at her and let go of her hand. Feng Ling instantly took a step to the side and resisted the urge to rub her wrist. She only raised her hand to adjust the clothes and collar that were slightly crooked because of the pull on her arm. "Sit down and eat," the man said. This atmosphere was completely different from the atmosphere she had expected. Clearly she was the one who took the initiative. How did she become the passive party in less than a few minutes? And she was the passive party who didn't even have a reason to escape. She did not move. Li Nanheng did not rush her. He casually picked up a bottle of wine on the table and the 2 glasses she had placed in the bag. He placed the 2 glasses on the table and filled them up. "If you want to get me drunk, the premise is that your alcohol tolerance can beat mine." The man picked up the wine glass and turned to hand it to her. His eyes were cold and bottomless, and there were 2 cold spots hidden in the night sky. "Boss, you really misunderstood." Feng Ling put down her hand that had just adjusted her collar and glanced at him. "To be frank, I just want to use the wine table to solve this stalemate with boss. I don't want to be so cold anymore. As for boss's problem of me not being honest enough, I also plan to explain it well. No matter what the misunderstanding is, I should make it clear." She paused for a moment and then said, "And indeed, as boss said, it is indeed a little difficult to get you drunk with just these few bottles of wine. It's impossible that I don't even know boss's alcohol tolerance." Li Nanheng's action of holding the wine glass in front of her did not change. His cold voice was neither fast nor slow. "Then drink." Feng Ling glanced at the full glass of wine again. "Boss, my alcohol tolerance is not very good. You know that. Don't you want to use the wine table to talk to me? You don't even drink a sip of wine. Are these 4 bottles all prepared for me? I drink and you look at me? Who gave you the courage and confidence?" The man had a smile on his lips, but his eyes were cold. It was obvious that he could still easily see through her. Feng Ling's eyes faltered. She raised her hand to take the wine glass and hesitated for a moment before taking a sip. After taking a sip, She was about to put it down when she suddenly received Li Nanheng's deep and probing gaze. Her emotions surged for a moment, and she had to drink the whole glass of wine. This was the bottle with the highest alcohol content among the 4 bottles of wine on the table. She didn't know where Han Jin got it from. The wine bottle was written as 65% Maodai flavor liquor, produced in China. Most of the wine Feng Ling drank in the United States was red wine or some other alcohol here, with high alcohol content and low alcohol content, but at most she couldn't drink any more after 2 or 3 glasses. As soon as the liquor entered her stomach, her throat was extremely hot, and then her stomach burned. Feng Ling held the empty glass in her hand. Because of the burning in her stomach, she was not used to it. After all, she had never drunk such strong wine. Wasn't this equivalent to shooting herself in the foot? She knew that these wines could not make Li Nanheng drunk at all, but she still took a few slightly stronger bottles. As a result, she was the first to drink it. Chapter 865. It was just a glass of white wine. The glass was neither big nor small, about 2 ounces. But in less than a minute she felt a little dizzy, her vision blurred, and the burning temperature in her stomach seemed to jump to her brain in an instant. She glanced at the food and wine on the table again and felt that if she stayed here any longer, she would be the only one to suffer. Li Nanheng didn't fall for it at all. Not to mention tricking him, it was almost impossible to get him drunk in this situation. Feng Ling didn't have the patience to fight with him anymore. She raised her hand to her mouth full of the taste of white wine and said, "This is the first time I've drunk white wine. I'm not used to it and my stomach feels uncomfortable. You can eat it. I'll go back first." With that, she was about to leave. Li Nanheng raised his cold eyebrows and glanced at her with a faint smile. His eyes were deep and dark. When Feng Ling turned around and took 2 steps away, he raised his hand to stop her. However, the moment the man's arm reached out, Feng Ling quickly took a step back and turned to look at him. Seeing the cold smile in his eyes, she knew he didn't intend to let her go so easily. She scolded herself for running into the tiger's mouth in the middle of the night. At the moment when the man was about to grab her arm, she instantly used the close combat method he taught her to avoid his hand and then raised her hand to block him. In just 2 or 3 moves, all of Feng Ling's moves were resolved. The man easily held her shoulders and held her down just as she was about to swing him away. With a backhand push, he pressed her against the cabinet door by the side. Her back hit the cabinet door heavily. Although it was heavy, she didn't feel much pain. Feng Ling raised her eyes abruptly, looked at the man who suddenly pressed against her and was about to attack him again, but the moment she raised her hands and feet, she heard the man sneer, "You want to fight with me with what I taught you? Do you really think you can do whatever you want because you've been doing well in the base's newcomer assessment for a long time?" The man's eyes were cold as he pressed one hand on her shoulder. Just this simple action made her unable to move. It was as if every part of her body was under his control. He could easily predict any movement she made. Furthermore, if she moved again, he would increase the strength between her shoulders and neck. In the end, she would be the only one who would be in pain. Feng Ling leaned against the cabinet door and said in a muffled voice, "Boss, I came to eat and drink with you out of kindness. I don't think things will develop to this point." Li Nanheng turned his eyes to the dishes on the table. The dishes are really carefully arranged and the wine is also good. Do I look like I'm easy to deal with? Feng Ling's stomach was burning and she gradually lost her patience. So what if he taught her these skills? If they really fought on the training ground, it wasn't like they hadn't fought for a few rounds. He was just in the wrong and didn't want to fight with him. Let go. There was no patience in her tone. The man looked at her coldly. His hand was still on her shoulder, but he maintained a distance of an arm's length. It was as though he was standing outside the cage and watching a little rabbit struggling in vain. "Boss, I respect you as my boss. No matter what you say or do, I'll regard you as my guide. I also believe that I'm sincere and loyal to the base, so I have a clear conscience when it comes to honesty." She looked at him very seriously. "Even now, I did come here to ease the relationship with you, boss, but if you insist on forcing me, I can't guarantee what I will do." The man glanced at her coldly. His white singlet accentuated his perfect physique, making it hard for a woman to resist. However, his expression was noble and cold. His voice was light and light, neither high nor low. "What did I force you to do?" Perhaps he wasn't forcing her. It was just that the more guilty a person was, the more complicated they would think about certain things, and the easier it was for them to fall into some kind of deadlock and panic. So, the problem was with her. Feng Ling was silent for a moment. She suddenly reached out and slapped the man's chest harshly. She then pushed his body away with her elbow and bent down to grab him from under his arm. Li Nanheng raised his brows slightly. He glanced at Feng Ling, who actually dared to make a move. He did not even frown. Without making a move, he directly grabbed the collar behind her neck and pulled her back. Feng Ling staggered. The moment her back leaned heavily against the cabinet door, the man bent down and approached her. When she hurriedly turned her head to the side to avoid him, he held her waist with one hand, not giving her a chance to move again. He used his other hand to lift her chin with his fingers, and his cold, black eyes sized up her slightly flushed cheeks because of the alcohol. Feng Ling raised her eyes in disbelief because of his actions. The moment her eyes met the man's, her heart trembled fiercely. She abruptly raised her voice to remind him, "Li Nanheng." The young man's voice carried a bit of anger and embarrassment, but he instantly lifted her chin and she had no choice but to raise her head slightly. She frowned. "It's just a glass of wine." "Boss, did you drink too much?" Li Nanheng's eyes were darker and deeper than the night outside the window. He looked at her and then at the beautiful curve of her neck when she raised her chin. His eyes were so dark that it was almost impossible to see the bottom. However, when his fingertips gently rubbed the smooth skin of her chin, her body instantly tensed up. "What did you call me?" The man's voice was low. Perhaps because of the alcohol, it was somewhat inexplicably hoarse. Feng Ling wanted to turn her head away, but because of the strength between the man's fingers, she could not successfully do so. She pressed her hand tightly against the cabinet door and then abruptly tightened her fingers into a fist. "Boss." She retracted her somewhat fierce expression and lowered her voice. "I just came to bring you a few bottles of wine. Don't joke around. I know I can't beat you. Can you let me go back to drink some hot water? My stomach really doesn't feel well." Just now, the boy had an angry expression like an angry little beast, but in the blink of an eye, he restrained himself a bit. Obviously he did not want to fight head-on. Li Nanheng looked at her calmly. "How disappointing it is to leave after drinking a glass of wine?" Feng Ling forced a smile. "My alcohol tolerance is so poor. If I drink too much and vomit here, it will be even more disappointing. This wine is my filial piety to you on behalf of Drill Master Han." The man snorted indifferently and suddenly let go of the hand that was locked on her shoulder. Chapter 866. Li Nanheng turned his head away and did not look at her. However, the moment he heard her footsteps moving away, a ruthless glint flashed across his eyes. He abruptly reached out and grabbed her wrist. This time, Feng Ling was completely caught off guard, and he suddenly pulled her back with unprecedented ferocity. Feng Ling's feet were unsteady and she fell back into the man's arms. She quickly reacted and reached out to push him away, ignoring the injury on his arm. After a few rounds of fighting, her sleeves were almost torn. Whether in terms of height or physical strength, the man was effortless in front of her. The moment Feng Ling was about to fight with him, he directly grabbed her wrist. The moment Feng Ling raised her eyes to glare at him, he abruptly raised his arm and swung her harshly onto the bed. Feng Ling was suddenly swung back several steps uncontrollably. Her legs hit the bed and she abruptly fell onto the bed. The moment she was about to get up, the man leaned over. She was about to get up when the man suddenly pressed her wrists down and pressed her down onto the bed. Her body was instantly suppressed and imprisoned. Feng Ling struggled and raised her eyes to glare at the man on top of her. "Let go." Li Nanheng's ink-black eyes stared at her motionlessly. Not only did he not let go, but he also moved his hand forward and held her hand firmly. Feng Ling was furious. "Let go of me." As she spoke, she struggled under him with all her might. Her hands could not move, so she could only kick out with her legs. However, the man faintly frowned because of her dishonest movements, and then sucked in a breath of cold air because of her constant kicking. He suddenly said in a low hoarse voice, "Don't move." Because of his tone, Feng Ling abruptly turned to look at his face. Seeing the man's deep and boundless black eyes, she was about to angrily rebuke him to let go of her, but for some reason she felt that there seemed to be something on her legs pushing against her, and it was becoming more and more obvious. She did not understand at first. She gritted her teeth in discomfort and wanted to kick her legs again, but the man firmly pressed her hand down and did not let her move. At the same time, his dark eyes seemed to contain some kind of danger as he watched her. "Boss." Feng Ling looked at the man on top of her, moved again, and quickly thought of a way to save herself. She begged anxiously, "Can you let go of me? I know I was wrong. Next time, I won't dare to come here with the intention of getting you drunk. I swear in the future I will never, you." The man abruptly bowed his head and did not hesitate to seal her lips. She stiffened all over and began to struggle with all her might. At the same time he fixed her chin with one hand and kissed her hard. While Feng Ling was breathing rapidly and wanted to avoid him, he resolutely pried her teeth and kissed her hard. One of Feng Ling's hands was free, but she could not push the man on top of her away. Instead, the man's breathing became heavier as she struggled more and more violently, and his kiss became deeper and deeper. Feng Ling wanted to bite him back, but he took the opportunity to drill his tongue deep into her mouth. The deep entanglement made it impossible for her teeth to bite him, and because of his deep kiss, her body trembled violently as though she had been electrocuted. The more she struggled, the harder Li Nanheng restrained her. After she struggled several times, he suddenly let go of her lips, pressed her hands above her head, and held her wrists with one hand. Li Nanheng, you, don't move. If you move again I will skin you on the spot. The man gritted his teeth. His voice was husky and seductive, and carried a hint of domineering fierceness. As Feng Ling glared at him, he bent down, held her chin and kissed her hard. You. Feng Ling's legs were suppressed by his legs, and her hands were also restrained above her head. All the physical strength and moves she had trained in the past seemed to be non-existent in front of him. Every force and movement was useless. After struggling for several minutes, she could only feel the mellow fragrance of wine lingering in her mouth, and the man's presence that could not be ignored invaded her lips and tongue, breaking all her self-control. Because Feng Ling could not struggle free, her neck was swollen and red from holding her breath. Li Nanheng paused for a moment, sucked her lips and said hoarsely against her lips, "Don't hold your breath. Breathe." Feng Ling opened her mouth and took a deep breath. The man looked at her rare obedient and cooperative appearance, and then at her flushed face. He could not help but kiss her again. Feng Ling, who was firmly held under the man's body, widened her eyes and finally found an opportunity to bite hard. Although the taste of blood spread in her mouth, the man did not seem to feel any pain and only kissed her harder. Their breaths tangled and it was impossible to tell who was bitten. She only knew that the taste of blood mixed with the taste of wine in her mouth made Feng Ling's brain, which was already affected by the high alcohol content, gradually lose control. After struggling several times, Feng Ling suddenly did not dare to move again. This was because the man's lower body was pressed against her position in an unstoppable manner. Earlier she did not react for a moment, but as a woman who had disguised as a man for so long, she knew the biggest difference between her and the man. That was... This time her face was no longer red because she was holding her breath. This time it was really hot and she stopped all struggling movements. However, because of this sudden stop, she could clearly feel the man's kiss between her lips and teeth. Her entire body became numb at this moment, and the feeling was even more obvious than when she was kissed in the bar that night, especially when the man's lower body was still pressed against her. Because she no longer struggled, the strength between the man's lips gradually became gentle and patient. However, knowing that Feng Ling would not give up so easily, he did not let go of the hands on top of her head. He held her waist as if to fill a long brewing desire, but no matter how he kissed, he could not fill this desire. He felt that if he really kissed her like this he would really peel off Feng Ling. He kissed her lips again and then lowered his head to kiss the corner of her mouth, chin, neck and the slightly open collar. Feeling that she was becoming more and more tense because of his actions, he closed his eyes and pressed his head against her neck. He did not move again. "Boss, have you been crazy enough?" "You." Feng Ling found her breath. Even her eyes were slightly red, and her voice was unreasonably hoarse. "Can you let me go now?" The moment her voice fell, the man on top of her put down her hand, but he did not let go. Instead, he abruptly pulled her hand down his body. Because of this action, Feng Ling's body abruptly trembled. She rushed to pull her hand back but was still firmly pulled down by him. Chapter 867. Li Nanheng, what the hell are you doing? Feng Ling struggled to take her hand away. Crazy, he must be crazy. She glared at him with reddened eyes, but just this was enough to make Feng Ling's body explode from the heat. Li Nanheng. Let go. Let go. Feng Ling began to struggle wildly again. She couldn't punch or kick him, but she definitely didn't compromise at all. However, as her body kept twisting, she withdrew her fingers and looked at him in disbelief. She shrank her fingers and looked at him in disbelief. Li Nanheng, let go. Ugh. The man watched her with dark eyes. He bent down to kiss her again and again. After a long time, when Feng Ling bit him again and again, he suddenly bit the root of her tongue as though punishing her. In an instant, the pain caused her to tremble all over. Her entire body was limp, and she lost all her strength as though her acupuncture point had been hit. Li Nanheng's breathing was a little heavy. He let go of her lips and said in a hoarse voice, "This is the result of your movement. If you move again it won't just be your hand." Feng Ling was also a little breathless. She was angry, forced and kissed. She gritted her teeth and said hatefully, "We're all men. Even if you don't just hit me, what else can you do? Li Nanheng, don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you're in charge of the base. Let go of me." The man looked at her flushed face and chuckled. "Who said that men can't do anything? If I really want to touch you, I have a way." Feng Ling raised her leg in anger and was about to kick him away, but she was suppressed by his leg again. He was afraid that he would find that she was completely different from him. Feng Ling suddenly raised her hand and bit hard on his shoulder. However, after biting for a long time, the man didn't even frown. She was so angry that she clutched the unhealed wound on his arm with all her might. Seeing that he still didn't move, she pinched his ligament-strained wrist again, but he still didn't move. "Li Nanheng." She gritted her teeth. "What do I have to do to make you stop?" A piercing pain came from his arm, but the man only glanced at the wound that was about to burst open and bleed again because of her fierce tearing and pinching. He did not make any movements to dodge but only curved his lips and his low husky voice came close to her ear. "You're quite ruthless. You clearly know where I am the weakest right now but you specifically attack my weakness. What? Just because I kissed you, you treat me as an enemy on the battlefield? You don't have any mercy at all? How is this a kiss? You're clearly—" She suddenly swallowed her angry voice and looked at the man's face in shock and horror. This time he didn't kiss her, but the distance between their lips was only half a finger. As long as she moved slightly he would definitely be able to kiss her. The man's face was close and his ink-like black eyes were also close. Feng Ling's lips trembled slightly, and her hands that were pressed by his sides were clenched into fists, but she couldn't move no matter how hard she struggled. The man's fragrance that was like that of a young girl lingered in his nose, and her face turned from red to white and gradually pink. Looking at her red ears and neck, Li Nanheng's eyes darkened. "If you don't want me to touch you, don't move. Otherwise, I'm afraid I can't control myself right now." Li Nanheng looked at her eyes that were glowing with anger. When she stiffened and stopped moving, he let out a long breath, abruptly let go of her hand and stood up to retreat. As soon as her body regained its freedom, Feng Ling quickly rolled on the bed to the side. She raised her hand to tug at her clothes that had been slightly disheveled. She turned to look at the man by the bed, her eyes filled with hatred and anger. "Don't look at me like that. You haven't escaped my control. If you're not afraid of death, continue to stare at me." The man glanced at her calmly and suddenly took off the white vest on his upper body. Seeing the man's naked upper body, Feng Ling's hair all stood on end. She didn't have time to appreciate the man's perfect figure and instantly stood up from the bed. Li Nanheng glanced at her expression that was like a little beast's hair standing on end, threw the vest in his hand to the side, and turned to enter the bathroom. When she heard the sound of water coming from the bathroom, Feng Ling, who was tense and alert, slowly breathed a sigh of relief. She turned and rushed out, closing the door behind her with a pang sound. Hearing the sound of the door coming from outside, Li Nanheng stood under the bone-chilling water, one hand on the wall, and let the cold water pour down on his head. However, he still felt that the fire in his body and the rising desire in his body were not reduced at all. As long as he closed his eyes, he would see Feng Ling's blushing face under him, and even his neck was beautiful. Just now, there was only one thought in his mind, and that was to ruthlessly bully this guy who was usually calm, indifferent, and extremely fast, and sometimes so adorable that it made people speechless, all over his body. He watched as his fair little face was dyed red, as his usually calm and indifferent expression was dyed with panic because of him, and watched as he lost his cool and struggled, and even directly cried under him. Li Nanheng furrowed his brows, closed his eyes and cursed in his heart. Fuck, why didn't he feel that he had a psychological problem in the past? No matter how he thought about it, he felt that at that moment, his mentality was almost equivalent to that of a pervert. Not to mention that Feng Ling was a man, more importantly, he was still an underage. After taking a full 10 minutes of cold water, his burning desire still did not reduce, but his body was almost frozen to the point of numbness. The man turned off the shower with one hand, picked up a towel to wrap around his lower body and turned to leave. The room was already empty, leaving only the messy surface of the bed and the cold dishes on the table. Li Nanheng's expression was heavy as he lit a cigarette. After taking a puff, he held it between his fingers and did not smoke again. He walked to the window and glanced at the pitch-black balcony next door. There was no light. He was most likely really frightened by him. After returning, he did not even turn on the lights. Chapter 868. The next day, morning training for the sniper team. The team of 5 people was as usual. Last night, the other 4 people went out to drink with Fat Tai and the others and came back drunk. When they woke up in the morning, they didn't look particularly good, so the 5 of them stood there in a neat formation and didn't look out of place at all. But Feng Ling clearly didn't go out to drink last night. Why did she also look so bad? Xiao Fei watched her for a while during the training and then stood behind her when she was practicing shooting. While watching her shooting accuracy, he asked her, "Didn't you sleep well last night?" She then put down the gun and said flatly, "Last night, Kay drank too much and called me for an hour in the middle of the night. I didn't get enough sleep last night because I listened to him blabbering on the phone." Li Nanheng nodded and said, "Don't worry, I won't be able to get enough sleep." Xiao Fei looked at her calm expression again. Last night he seemed to have seen Kay calling someone on the phone. He originally thought that he secretly had a girlfriend outside the base, but he didn't expect that the brat called Feng Ling. "Why did he call you?" Xiao Fei raised his eyebrows. "How should I know? He drank too much and probably mistook me for his brother. I was sleepy at that time and didn't hear what he said clearly. I only heard him talking about his family troubles. Kay came to the base because he ran away from home. There must be something at home that made him feel helpless. He drank too much, so he called me to talk to me," Feng Ling said lightly. Xiao Fei raised his eyebrows and said with some jealousy, This brat, he thinks that you are a bosom sister." Feng Ling immediately turned to look at him and Xiao Fei smiled again. Okay, bosom little brother." Feng Ling picked up the long gun next to her and didn't continue to speak. Seeing that she was training seriously, Xiao Fei couldn't tell what was wrong. It seemed that nothing had happened, but for some reason he felt that Feng Ling's aura was not good. Seeing that she was training seriously, Xiao Fei didn't say more and turned to continue training with the other 4 people. During the break, Xiao Fei temporarily went to the training camp of Team 2. The 5 of them sat on the training ground, stood, and 2 were drinking water by the side. Feng Ling, on the other hand, did not stop. She kept shooting at the target and the sound of gunshots was endless. "Hey, what's wrong with Feng Ling? He doesn't seem to be in a good mood," Lin Qing whispered to Tam. Tam turned to look in Feng Ling's direction and saw that she was loading the bullets into the gun expressionlessly. He then turned to look at Kay, who was also looking over with a strange expression. He shook his head at Tam. "I don't know. Usually, Feng Ling should be the most honest and stable among us. Today it seems that we shouldn't provoke her. Didn't we go drinking last night? Didn't she stay in the base? Did something happen?" Lin Qing shook his head. "Who knows? Hey Kay, do you know the reason?" Tam patted Kay, who was walking over. Kay shrugged. "I drank so much last night that even my mother couldn't recognize me. How would I know the reason? But what? When I woke up this morning I saw a call record on my phone. I called Feng Ling in the middle of the night last night. The call lasted for an entire hour. I wonder if I said some nonsense on the phone after drinking too much and offended her? Or maybe she didn't sleep well because of me? Is that why she is like this?" Lin Qing and Tam immediately rolled their eyes at her. "If you drink too much, then drink too much. Why did you call someone for no reason? Isn't that because I drank too much? The most recent call record is only from Feng Ling. I guess I just casually pressed a button and made the call." As they were quietly discussing, the sound of Feng Ling's shooting continued. Basically, she shot every 20 seconds and each shot was extremely accurate. Suddenly, Li Nanheng's figure approached. Kay turned to see Boss, hurriedly nodded to him respectfully and said, "Good morning, Boss." Li Nanheng did not respond. From afar he heard Feng Ling shooting here. When he approached, he glanced at Feng Ling, who was standing on the shooting ground. He looked at her straight back in the way she held the gun, and then at her non-stop shooting. He was about to walk over. "Bosley." A few days ago he saw that Bosley was targeting Feng Ling, thinking that he was going to find trouble with Feng Ling again. Kay quickly gathered his courage and blocked in front of him. He said with a smile, "Boss, it's break time now. When we resume training I have a few new movements that are not standard. Boss, please give me some pointers." Li Nanheng coldly looked at Kay, who was smiling like a monkey in front of him. "Get lost." The man's voice was low and heavy. He could see through Kay's purpose at a glance and his tone was impatient. Kay's throat choked. He raised his hand to touch his nose and had no choice but to move aside. However, just as he moved aside, Kay suddenly saw a small wound on his mouth. He immediately said in surprise, "Oh boss, what happened to your mouth? Did you get angry? Why is your mouth injured?" Li Nanheng glanced at him coldly again. Kay immediately shrank his neck and raised his hand to touch the back of his neck. He thought for a long time but still didn't know how to continue blocking Boss's steps and how to help Feng Ling. Feng Ling heard the voice behind her and ignored it. However, when she heard Kay say that Li Nanheng's mouth was injured, the bullets that were accurately shot to the center suddenly missed. She knew very well how hard she had bitten herself last night. She had tasted blood at that time. But Boss Li didn't bite her very much. The only thing he bit was her tongue, and it was not a hard bite. However, she was afraid that someone would find out this morning, so she had been pressing an ice pack on her mouth last night, so when she woke up in the morning, there was no trace of being kissed or swelling. Feng Ling's eyes turned even colder when she saw the bullet that was off by 2 rings. She raised the gun again when she suddenly heard Li Nanheng's voice from behind. The number of bullets used for shooting training in the base is limited every week. Do you plan to use up the bullets of the entire sniper team in one day? The others don't need to practice anymore? Chapter 869. Kay was so scared that an egg could almost be stuffed into his mouth. Shit, was Feng Ling crazy? He actually dared to point a gun at Boss. Was Feng Ling courting death? Or was it because Boss was usually too strict with her that she was forced into a corner and wanted to die with Boss? The other 3 people were also stunned by Feng Ling's movement. They all put on a defensive expression and were ready to pounce on him if Feng Ling really dared to shoot at Boss. Although they were brothers in the same sniper team and had a deep friendship, Boss was Boss after all. They couldn't have internal strife. Feng Ling, what are you doing? Put the gun down. Kay abruptly roared at her. Are you crazy from practicing shooting? Did I disturb your sleep last night? Are you not awake now? Put it down. Feng Ling didn't move but directly pulled the trigger on the gun, staring at Li Nanheng's expressionless face. Feng Ling. Kay called her again and hurriedly stood in front of Li Nanheng to protect him. At the same time he looked back and said, Boss, I drank too much last night and called Feng Ling in the middle of the night. I woke her up all night. I guess she didn't sleep well and is still confused. Boss, you go first. However, Li Nanheng calmly looked at Feng Ling and the gun in her hand, not surprised at all and had no intention of retreating. Get out of the way. Kay heard the man's cold and calm voice behind him. Kay was stunned and looked back at him. Boss. Li Nanheng didn't speak anymore and raised his hand to push the man in front of him away, but Kay could feel that Boss was already very polite. At least he didn't kick him aside but just pushed him away. The moment Kay stepped aside, he looked up and saw that Li Nanheng didn't dodge but walked toward Feng Ling step by step. Feng Ling stood there, her posture unchanged and her eyes didn't change. The man approached step by step. When he was about to reach her, Li Nanheng looked at the muzzle only 2 meters away from him and frowned slightly. He just looked at her. Feng Ling, what are you doing? At this time Qiao Fei came back from outside. Seeing this scene, his heart skipped a beat. When he was about to step forward, Kay hurriedly reached out to stop him and whispered, Brother Qiao, don't go there. I don't know what happened between Boss and Feng Ling. Why did they fight here? Qiao Fei frowned, took a look at Feng Ling, and then looked at Li Nanheng who stood there without even dodging. He was about to push Kay away but Kay didn't dare to stop Boss, but he had a good relationship with Qiao Fei so he dared to stop him. In fact, the main reason was that he was afraid that if everyone went over, Feng Ling would impulsively shoot. At that time it wouldn't be good, not to mention accidentally injuring anyone. However, he felt that this matter was between Feng Ling and Boss. No one else should be able to interfere. Ling, put the gun down. Don't talk. What you want? Do you know who you are? Kaib asked. Kithet Feng that he say Fei that Xiao Qiao Qiao said, Ling B. Feng at Feng Ling Ling to say. Ling Li Nanheng looked at Feng Ling shoot. Feng Ling's hand that was holding the gun suddenly paused because of the man's words. Perhaps she had a momentary impulse earlier and used her posture to turn around. But at this moment she suddenly came back to herself. The man looked at her calmly. Shoot. She clenched the gun and pressed her finger hard on the trigger. Li Nanheng walked over. Under the worried eyes of a group of people, he stepped forward fearlessly, grabbed Feng Ling's wrist that was holding the gun, and gently twisted it. Feng Ling's fingers instantly became weak because of the soreness in her wrist, and the gun fell to the ground. Due to the strength of the man pulling her, she staggered and almost leaned against him. She steadied herself and abruptly took a large step to the side. Seeing that she was avoiding him, Li Nanheng looked indifferent. What is the first rule of the training ground of 11 base? Feng Ling put her hands on her sides, slowly clenched them into fists, and then slowly let out a long breath, saying in a low voice, no matter when, as long as you are in the base, you can't point the muzzle at your own people. So what were you doing just now? The man lowered his eyes and looked at her indifferently. After a minute of silence, Feng Ling turned around and faced Li Nanheng. Boss, I've violated the most basic rule of the base. Please punish me by sending me on a mission. No matter if it's in Africa or anywhere else, I'll go. No matter how difficult the mission is, I won't have any complaints. Xiao Fei immediately frowned hard, pushed Kay, who was standing in front of him, away and walked over. Feng Ling, are you crazy or stupid? Don't you know where this place is? This is not only 11 base, but also the sniper team that the base focuses on training. Do you know the consequences of being sent out? From now on, you may not even be able to get a sniper rifle, and your place will be replaced by someone else. Feng Ling's expression didn't change. I know, but I'm wrong. I won't defend myself. Xiao Fei frowned hard and turned to look at Li Nanheng, whose eyes were cold and deep, but no one knew what he was thinking. Boss, give her a chance. She must have been too nervous during the training and made such a mistake because of the mental pressure. It's not suitable for her to be sent out. If you really want to punish her, you can use other methods. Feng Ling didn't speak anymore but looked down at the gun under her feet. Lin Cheng and Tam whispered by the side, is Feng Ling courting death? As the most promising member of the sniper team, does she want to give up all her previous efforts? Kay also frowned hard and looked at Feng Ling worriedly. He had never seen Feng Ling so impulsive. He could feel that Feng Ling's temperament was not very calm today. Obviously, she was somewhat reckless and impulsive. He hoped that Boss wouldn't be too calculative with her, otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Li Nanheng looked at Feng Ling. Feng Ling didn't speak. Just when Xiao Fei was about to speak again, Li Nanheng said indifferently, you guys go out first. Xiao Fei immediately looked at them thoughtfully, and Kay and the others didn't dare to say more. However, seeing that Boss seemed to be very calm, at least not as impulsive as Feng Ling, no one said anything. In this situation, who dared to speak or disobey Boss would really feel that they were looking for death. Xiao Fei hesitated for a moment and also turned to go out. There were only 2 people left on the training ground. Feng Ling slowly loosened her clenched fists and turned to avoid Li Nanheng's eyes. The man's voice suddenly rang coldly. Turn around. Who taught you to show people the back of your head? Chapter 870. She turned around again. This time she didn't avoid his gaze and looked directly at him, but there was no emotion. Li Nanheng narrowed his eyes. You want to leave the base? Seeing the man's expression as though nothing had happened last night and as though everything was as it should be, Feng Ling clenched her fists again. But she was a man, right? She couldn't be too spoiled, nor could she indulge her desire to shoot him last night. She could only endure it. Boss, please let me leave for a while. Feng Ling was silent for a moment and said calmly, I need some time alone. Do you need time alone or time to avoid me? Feng Ling's neatly trimmed nails stabbed into her palms, and her calm eyes became much colder. She looked at him coldly. I don't want to say more, but even if you're the person in charge of 11 base and the boss here, it doesn't mean I can let you do whatever you want. I like you. There's no need to hide this kind of thing. It's not shameful. Li Nanheng interrupted her. Feng Ling's expression froze. Suddenly, because of his calmness, she couldn't even vent her anger. She just looked at him in disbelief. Boss, I'm a man. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. The point is that I like you. It's up to you whether you accept it or not. It's up to me whether I like you or not. Li Nanheng didn't hide his sincerity. Don't forget, you took the initiative to come to me last night. Feng Ling was speechless and frowned. I brought you wine. Didn't you bring me wine to get me drunk and get some information from me? Feng Ling, the man's eyes were cold and sarcastic. Even if I get drunk, the only thing you can get out of me is that I like you. Since you want to know so much, I might as well tell you while I'm sober. Feng Ling, boss, don't make such a joke. My physiological reaction last night didn't seem to be a joke. What did you think I went to the bathroom last night for? Feng Ling, she was not a man. How would she know what he went there for? 11 base is completely militarized. Everyone here is equivalent to a soldier. The most important rule of the base is honesty. Since you can't control your heart, there's no need to lie. I'm not trying to force you. I'm just telling you clearly that I like you. There's no need for you to hide. If you don't like me, just reject me. What's there to hide for? The man looked at the young man who was a head shorter than him and looked down condescendingly at her. Since you can't control your own heart, there's no need for you to lie. These words were said by this man too calmly, as if he had done nothing wrong. Feng Ling abruptly raised her eyes to look at him. When she saw the place on the man's lips that she had bitten, her heart, which was pretending to be calm, seemed to have been knocked over. All kinds of feelings emerged. But no matter how she thought about it, she felt that although he was calm, it didn't mean that he wasn't domineering. If it was really as he said, if she didn't like it, or if she wasn't prepared to accept it and could directly reject it, then how much had she struggled last night? Didn't he also not let her off? But it couldn't be said that he didn't let her off. Although it was indeed out of line for her, and even now her palms were a little hot, but it seemed that he didn't do anything that he shouldn't have. At least he didn't even undo his clothes. Feng Ling didn't dare to believe that her originally calm heart would be so unpredictable because of a few words from a man. From the anger that was on the verge of collapse last night to the huge contradiction at this moment, she completely didn't know what to do. Raise your head. The man looked at her. Feng Ling raised her eyes and looked straight at him. Their eyes met. The man stared at her eyes for a moment and then glanced at the gun by her feet. His voice was cold, but you violated the training grounds rules in public. I can't just let it go like this. Feng Ling knew what the consequences of what she had just done would be. She didn't think too much about it. She only felt that no matter what, it was good for her to temporarily leave the base and go out to relax or do something else. After all, something in her single concept of life seemed to have been disrupted. She was very confused now. The continental divide in Montana is called Rogers Pass, which is a very cold place compared to the entire United States. It experiences cold waves all year round. The U.S. military plans to build a transportation channel there, but the area adjacent to Montana is where many mafias are stationed. The road construction team sent by the military is likely to be ambushed, so we need to send a group of people to stay there for at least 3 months. They can't leave until the transportation channel is successfully built. But it's not sure whether those mafias will lay their hands on them. After all, if such a transportation channel is built, it will have a great impact on the interests of one group of people, but it won't have any impact on the interests of another group of people. We're not sure whether those people will be involved, so it's too much of a waste of manpower and combat power to stay there for more than 3 months. For the time being, the base won't send the elite team there. You're relatively the best among them. Go to each team and pick a few newcomers to go with you. Just like every time she accepted a mission, Feng Ling had no objection. Okay. Seeing that she would accept any mission no matter where she went, Li Nanheng glanced at her indifferently. That is the coldest place in the United States. Can you withstand it? My physical fitness should be fine. 2 years ago, I also did a whole half year of cold resistance training in the base. My physical fitness and cold resistance are good. Feng Ling said with a business-like expression. Boss, please rest assured. As long as she didn't talk about feelings, she was still the calm and indifferent Feng Ling. Go pick a few reliable people. As long as it's the people you've confirmed, ask Han Jin to arrange the list and inform the base. Okay. Set off in 2 days. Okay. Prepare all the cold-proof clothes before you set off. If you need anything, just tell the person in charge of these things at the base. They will prepare according to your requirements. Okay. Don't you have anything to say? Feng Ling had always been well prepared for the upcoming missions and challenges, including psychological preparation. Anyway, the result was caused by her, so she had nothing to ask for. She just looked up at him. Thank you, boss. Chapter 871. Han Jin received the list from Feng Ling, glanced at the names on it and sighed. Feng Ling's idea is similar to mine. These people usually perform well in the team but often try to take advantage of others. They really need to go out to that kind of place to exercise so as to cherish the life in the base. Feng Ling is usually quiet, but he is really a man of ideas. Xiao Su, who brought the list over, sat down on the chair next to him and glanced at the list in his hand. My boss is very curious why boss sent Feng Ling to Rogers Pass. There's no village or shop in that place. There's not even an electronic device. Even the US military is unwilling to send people to that place. Even if someone freezes to death there, no one will know. Why did he send Feng Ling there? Xiao Su was a little surprised. Who knows? Do you dare to ask? Han Jin glanced at him. The corners of Xiao Su's mouth twitched. I won't go. Boss Li has been very depressed these 2 days. I feel cold when I walk a meter away from him, but I heard that something happened between Feng Ling and boss the day before yesterday. Xiao Su's lips twitched. Han Jin raised his eyebrows. Do you mean that Feng Ling pointed a gun at boss Li? Xiao Su slapped his thigh. Yes, that's it. The boys in the sniper team are very tight-lipped and don't talk about it to people outside their team, but Lin Cheng and Tam talked about it in the canteen of the base. I heard it, but I didn't ask more at that time. Han Jin raised his eyebrows, put down the list in his hand and smiled again. It seemed that something really happened when he asked Feng Ling to send some wine and food to Boss Li that night, but he didn't know what happened and why it suddenly became so serious. Han Ji knew very well how much Boss Li could drink, so he was sure that Feng Ling wouldn't be able to get him drunk easily. But judging from the current situation that night, could it be that Boss had done Feng Ling on the spot? But when he saw Feng Ling in the base these 2 days, his walking posture was very stable. It didn't seem to be, that was impossible. Tiske, he clearly wanted to ease the tension between them, but now he didn't even know what had happened. His heart was really itching, but there was no one he could ask. Feng Ling's mouth was tight and he couldn't get anything out of her. As for Boss Li, unless he wanted to die, how could he dare to ask? The snipers probably didn't know what happened that night when they weren't around. There's obviously a delicious melon in front of me, but I can't eat it to my heart's content, it's really suffocating. Feng Ling, think about it carefully. The conditions in Rogers Pass are very difficult. You may not be able to come back if you go there. After the morning training, Xiao Fei directly dragged Feng Ling outside. He frowned and looked at her with a serious expression. Before we set off, we can still discuss with Boss. Let's not talk about how much training you'll miss in the sniper team for the next 3 months. If you get frostbite in that kind of place, you might not be able to pick up a sniper rifle for a long time. Deputy Drill Master Qiao, this matter has been decided, and there is no room for negotiation. Besides, this is the punishment I received after I made a mistake. I have no right to ask for a change. If you don't want to go, I can directly talk to Boss. Even if he beats me in the base, he will more or less give me some face because of the relationship between the Qiao family and the Li family. Xiao Fei looked at her. Don't be impulsive. You can't go to that kind of place where you may not come back. We are all members of the base. Why can others go but I can't? Feng Ling asked. Doesn't the base always treat everyone equally? When in danger, Boss Li can fight in front of us regardless of his life. As a member of the base, should I hide in the base and be protected all the time? Xiao Fei was a little helpless. You can take it as my selfishness. Anyway, I don't want you to go to that kind of place. Deputy Drill Master Qiao, you have relationships outside the base, family backgrounds, backers and connections, but I have nothing. All I have is 11 base. Now the base has sent me out on a mission, and I have no intention of retreating. Please don't force your selfishness on me, Feng Ling said and took a step back. Thank you for your concern. I know what I'm doing. Xiao Fei's expression froze. Looking at her obviously alienated expression, he knew that what he said just now really sounded too selfish. Feng Ling, who had never been selfish in the base, might find it difficult to accept his selfishness. He didn't want her to take risks and didn't want anything to happen to her, but he could only swallow his selfishness. He even wanted to ask for a swap, even if he wanted to replace Feng Ling and let him go to Rogers Pass. But Feng Ling's attitude was very obvious. She really planned to go there in person. He sighed and smiled. If you really want to go, the sniper team will temporarily transfer everyone back to Team 1. After all, it's the 5 of you who have been training. They may not be able to continue training until you come back. I have nothing to do during this period, so I can apply to accompany you to Rogers Pass. The list has been submitted and I will leave tomorrow. Deputy Drill Master Qiao, you don't have to accompany me. I don't have any worries. If I really can't come back, I don't care. But for someone like you who has high hopes from your family and is ready to leave the base to inherit the family business at any time, there are too many people behind you. You really can't go. Feng Ling, Xiao Fei sighed. I'm really worried. I'll take care of myself. Feng Ling nodded at him, didn't intend to continue to say more, and went back to the training ground without looking back. This was the last day of training before she left for Rogers Pass. She still took it seriously as usual. In the evening, she returned to her residence and began to pack up the things to take away tomorrow. Each member of this departure would be given 2 large-capacity suitcases. The most basic thing was to put some very thick quilts and cold-proof clothes, as well as various cold-proof medicines and other things, in which 2 suitcases could be filled. Feng Ling usually didn't need many things, and she heard that the electronic communication over there was not very convenient. The cell phone signal could only be restored after a certain period of time, and there was no internet, so she didn't need to bring a computer. Just a cell phone was enough. Chapter 872. Rogers Pass was very far from Los Angeles. Even if they flew there, they couldn't reach it directly. The base arranged a helicopter, but it had to land in the center of Montana. For the rest of the journey they had to drive off-road vehicles, and the vehicles must be equipped with very good snow tires. Otherwise it was very likely that they would fall from the cliffs due to slippery roads and die. There were several acquaintances from Team 1 who set off with Feng Ling. Fat Tai was also among them. There were also members of several other teams. Everyone was very familiar with each other, so they had a tacit understanding. When Fat Tai heard that he was assigned to the mission of Rogers Pass, he cried for a long time. Han Jin directly told him to go there and lose weight, which successfully dispelled Fatty's original intention to refuse. It was already late at night when they finally arrived at the target location, which was directly above Rogers Pass. They were on the cliff of a snow-capped mountain, and the wind was biting cold. Although they were physically fit in the base, the wind was too cold. In the second half of the night, they could only hear the howling of the cold wind, as if the wind would sweep them away and engulf them in the snow-capped mountain if the wind was any stronger. Achoo! Fat Tai sneezed and his face was cold and red. He said with a painful expression, "Oh my God, although I'm fat, my physical fitness has always been good after so many years of exercise. I actually caught a cold as soon as I came here. Are we really going to be stationed in this damn place for 3 months? After 3 months, I'm afraid I'll only be left with a lonely soul." De Bin, who was standing behind Fat Tai, laughed and kicked his butt. "If you really froze to death, you wouldn't be a freaking lonely soul. Your soul has to be weighed. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's a big lump. Go away, we're going to freeze to death in this damn place together and you still have the mood to laugh?" Fat Tai roared angrily behind him, but as he roared he saw that everyone's face was as cold as a monkey's butt, and he couldn't help but fall to the ground with laughter. Feng Ling's face was also a little red, but it was not as serious as theirs. There were 2 red spots on her cheeks because of the cold wind. She pulled up her neckline to block the cold wind, and soon her skin color returned to normal. The combat clothes she usually wore in the base were customized according to her height, but this time they had come out in a hurry, so the cold-proof clothes the base had prepared for all of them were about the same size. The clothes she wore were big enough to cover her entire body. It was easy for her to squeeze her head into the collar so she didn't feel too cold. "Alright, stop playing. Let's find a place that is sheltered from the wind. Aren't there 2 good cold-proof and windproof tents in the car? Hurry up and put them on. We'll continue to prepare tomorrow morning," Feng Ling said as she turned around and walked quickly back to the car. Although it was warm in the car, they only drove 2 large SUVs. When they came here, the fuel tanks were full. After such a long journey, the fuel tanks were almost empty. The spare barrels of gasoline in the car were only enough for them to drive back and forth to the gas station in the city center of Montana. They couldn't keep the heater in the car because they wanted to keep warm. In this way the gasoline would run out soon, so it was not practical to keep warm in the car. Feng Ling was the person in charge of the Rogers Pass station this time. She was the captain of this mission, but she didn't complain and immediately went to prepare the tent. The other people who were still sighing were too embarrassed to complain and followed her. Fat Tai stepped on the snow on the ground and said as he walked to the car, "I've never seen so much snow in my life." Feng Ling walked to a sheltered place with the tent frame in her arms and said to him, "If you don't set up the tent quickly, your body will be buried in such a thick snow. If you don't want to freeze to death, hurry up and get to work." Fat Tai raised his hand and rubbed his aching face, and hurriedly ran over to help. After all, they were well-trained people in the base. In less than half an hour, 2 large tents had been set up. Everyone went in to try it. Although it was a tent set up in a world of ice and snow, 11 Base was supported by the United Nations, and all the equipment was top-notch. The material of this kind of tent was cold-proof and self-heating. After it was set up, the door was also closed. After a while they could feel that the snow covered inside gradually melted, and the temperature seemed to gradually rise. Although it was not very hot, at least as long as they sat in thick clothes, they would not be too cold, and it was not a problem to sleep with a thick quilt. However, although this tent was large, there were only a few beds in it. Including Feng Ling, there were 8 people in their group, but after 7 beds were set up, they needed to put their military equipment, tables, chairs, and daily necessities in the empty space next to them. Feng Ling said she was going to live in another tent and didn't need to worry about her, but Fat Tai said that the more people in this kind of tent, the warmer it would be. If she lived alone, it would be very cold. Feng Ling said it didn't matter. She was used to living alone. After making some simple arrangements, she took her things into another tent. In this way the 8 people settled down in Rogers Pass. After a temporary rest for a night, they woke up the next day and began to pack up all their daily necessities and thermal tools, including some temporary electrical equipment, pots, pans, and other things to eat. 3 days later they were almost tired of the dry food they brought. Although they brought a lot, almost no one wanted to eat it anymore. They had survived melting snow into water, boiling it to drink, surviving the winter night and all kinds of things, but they couldn't survive eating. Dabin said that there were usually frozen rivers in this kind of snow mountain. If they could catch fish under the ice, it would be very delicious, so the group of people began to study how to find a river and break the ice to catch fish. Everyone sighed in the first few days, but now almost everyone had a certain excitement of adventure and survival in the wild. Even Feng Ling was almost infected by them. The others went out to find a river, and Feng Ling stayed in their tent to study how to save energy and quickly start a fire. She sat in the snow in thick, big clothes, holding a match and a lighter in her hand, and looked at the things on the ground that were suitable for starting a fire. Suddenly, there seemed to be the sound of a car passing by in the distance. How could there be a car in this kind of place? Feng Ling turned her head and saw a tall figure coming down from the black off-road vehicle. When she saw that it was Nanheng, who was wearing a black winter suit and walking step by step on the snow, the lighter and match in her hand instantly fell into the snow. Chapter 873. She watched as the man walked closer and closer. Even in the thick snow that was half a meter deep, his steps were still steady and he came to her in a few steps. Feng Ling raised her head and looked at him blankly. Li Nanheng lowered his head to look at her indifferently. He watched as she sat in the snow in a thick coat, looking like a child wearing adult clothes. When he saw that she had not reacted for a long time, his cold brows moved. "Are you silly?" Feng Ling suddenly came back to herself, looked at him again, and then lowered her head to pick up the matches and lighter that had fallen to the ground. She struggled to get up from the ground. The clothes were too big and too thick, and it was really inconvenient for her to stand up. She struggled to stand up and looked at the man in front of her. Seeing the white mist coming out of his mouth, she was sure that this was really Boss Li and not an illusion. "Boss, why are you here?" Li Nanheng glanced at her stunned expression and turned to look at the white snow and the various steep and cold mountain walls around. His indifferent tone somehow seemed a little warm in this severe coldness. "Han Jin and Ah Feng, sent by the Li family, are temporarily in charge of the base. We can't really throw you guys to Rogers Pass to fend for yourselves." Of course they wouldn't fend for yourselves, but in the past 2 days when they were bored staying in the tent and chatting together, several members did sigh in the tent and said that the leaders of the base felt that they were lazy or a group of people who had been abandoned by the base because of their poor performance in a mission. Otherwise, how could they be thrown to such a remote place to guard? They were even more miserable than the troops stationed at the border or the border peacekeepers. No matter how Feng Ling explained to them, they were still infected by this kind of emotion. She tried her best to restore their morale, and now they went out to look for a river to fish, but she guessed that they still had some complaints about the base in their hearts. Now that Boss Li had come in person, as long as he stood here, it would be more useful than her explaining to them 100 words. Since the boss had come personally, it meant that the base hadn't given up on them, and it wasn't that they weren't valued. It even showed how important the mission of guarding this place was, and it could instantly dispel the thoughts of those members. "So Boss is here to see everyone and cheer them up?" Feng Ling asked again. At the same time, she glanced at the car parked not far away. There was no one else in the car. He actually drove here himself. This place was far from the center of Montana. The mountains were high and the roads were long. It would take a long time to drive there, especially when the road up the mountain was very dangerous. They could encounter an avalanche at any time, but he actually drove there himself. Li Nanheng didn't explain but glanced at the thing in her hand. "What are you doing?" Feng Ling paused and pointed to the pile of dry firewood on the ground. "I'm thinking of a way to start a fire. Although the tools and equipment I brought are not bad, if we're really going to live here for 3 months, we have to use them sparingly. Otherwise they might all be used up in less than a month." "It doesn't matter if it's used up. The base didn't just throw you here. Every 10 days someone will send the necessary supplies over." Although he said so, Li Nanheng reached out and took the matches and lighter from her hand. Feng Ling looked at him and subconsciously gave up the position of the pile of dry firewood. She didn't usually smoke and rarely used things like matches and lighters, so she was still a little unfamiliar with starting a fire. Although there was wilderness survival training in the base, most of it was related to tropical forests or forests. She grew up in a wolf cave and had always been very confident in survival in the wild. However, she didn't expect that after coming to the base, her first wilderness survival would be in such a bitter cold. Even someone as calm as Feng Ling didn't sleep well last night. She had been worrying about how she would live in such a cold place for 3 months. Li Nanheng squatted down, reached out to check the fire she put on the ground and said lightly, "The ground is covered with snow, and there is a thick layer of ice under the snow. Do you want to start a fire on it? Even if there is a fire, it will be extinguished in a few minutes. With that, the man glanced at the 2 tents not far away. The tents are also fireproof and cold-proof. Why don't you take them inside? I want to make a slightly larger space opposite the tent. I want to melt all the snow on the ground. After all, the tent is used to rest and live in. If the firewood and the coal transported from the base burn inside, I'm worried that it might cause the coal to be poisoned. That's right. I'm not sure. Open the tents to let out some air. If there is flowing air, you won't be poisoned. Li Nanheng poked the firewood on the ground and lit it up. And then, as he said, the cold wind here was biting cold. Before the fire touched the snow below, it was directly blown out. The man was still squatting there, checking how thick the ice was in the snow. Feng Ling stood behind him and looked at the man who was also wearing a thick black winter suit like her. She wondered if the size of her clothes was made according to his height and body shape. It was so big that it was thick and swollen. When she first put it on that day, she walked like a child who had just learned to walk. She walked back and forth unsteadily. Today she walked more smoothly. But looking at the winter suit Li Nanheng was wearing, it was also very thick, but strangely it did not look bloated on him at all. In fact, it looked very stylish. Feng Ling looked at him and then at her trousers that were rolled up 3 times. She pursed her lips and did not say anything. The man in front of her stood up. Feng Ling looked at the pile of dry firewood on the ground. Won't it work? Li Nanheng turned to look at her. The road is for people to walk. Nothing can't work. Where are Fat Tai and the others? They've been tired of eating dry food for the past few days. They said they were going to find the river under the snow mountain and break the ice to catch some fish to eat. Li Nanheng took a few steps forward as if he was walking, but also as if he was measuring how thick the snow and ice were nearby. A few minutes later, standing a few meters away, he kicked away a stone covered with frost and snow on the ground and said, "When they come back, ask them to take an ice-breaking tool to cut the snow and ice within 20 square meters of here first. There should be something in the car that the base asked you to prepare. After the snow and ice on the ground are gone, lay those things on it. As long as it is well maintained every day, it won't freeze for 3 months." It turned out that the things in the car were used like this. No wonder the person in charge of sending them to Montana said that although they would send them things regularly, the things in their car could basically be used to the best of their ability. So this was what he meant. Chapter 874. If you have time to break the ice in the river, you might as well get rid of the ice in front of your house first, Li Nanheng said indifferently. You haven't solved the problem of accommodation yet, but you should be busy looking for food first. Boss Li's tone was reproachful and helpless, but he should be able to understand. After all, in this environment, whether it was food or accommodation, they were all important things. Boss, sit inside first. It's too cold outside, Feng Ling said and pointed to the 2 tents over there. Li Nanheng didn't look at her but walked to the cliff in front of him and looked down. Feng Ling looked at the man's back and remembered that she was also punished to come here for doing something wrong. At that time he had given her a chance, but she didn't cherish it. It was not strange that he was too lazy to talk to her now. She didn't speak anymore and looked back at the snow and the pile of dry firewood on the ground. She had asked Fat Tai and the others to go out to catch fish because she wanted some peace and quiet. The 7 men sitting together were so idle that they couldn't be any more idle. They were even noisier than a group of women sitting together talking all at once. In addition, they were used to their busy lives because of training. Suddenly they didn't have to train too much. Every day they would study how to live, eat, and live, which was even more chaotic. She would rather be a logistician here and study how everyone could eat and live comfortably than let them quarrel by the side. She took out a sturdy shovel and drew a square space of about 20 square meters on the ground opposite the tent. She then pushed away the snow on it and used the sharp part of the shovel to smash the ice layer below. Hearing the sound, Li Nanheng turned back to see Feng Ling working hard alone and then watched her smash for a long time but only made a few white marks on the ice. The man watched for a while and walked over with his hands clasped behind his back. He walked 1 round around her and then stopped by the side. He glanced sideways at her as she continued to smash the ice. "Do you know what you look like now?" Feng Ling heard the teasing in his words and ignored him. She lowered her head and continued to smash the ice. As she smashed, she said, "This kind of ice on the snow mountain all year round, let's not talk about whether it's thick or not, but it's definitely very solid. It can't be broken so easily. Boss, please move aside, lest I swing the shovel in my hand onto your face again." Li Nanheng watched her continue to work hard, and the coldness in his eyes was gradually amused by her clumsy movements. Like a bear with uncoordinated limbs. Feng Ling paused and turned to look at him with a jerk. In the blink of an eye, because the hat on her head was too big, half of her face was almost buried in the hat. For a moment she didn't see the flash of smile in the man's eyes. She raised her hand and tugged the hat down with force, looking at the man's still cold face. This winter suit is too big. It's not something I can wear at all. It's already not easy for me to walk normally in it. Boss, if you came here just to tease me, please go back to the tent to rest. Don't disturb me here. Li Nanheng sneered, snatched the shovel in her hand, and pointed to the off-road vehicle they had driven over with his chin. Isn't there salt in the car prepared for you by the base? Feng Ling paused, looked at the shovel that he had snatched away, and then raised her eyes to look at him. Although he was standing in such a cold place, his face was not red from the wind at all. He still looked the same as when he came. She was puzzled. Isn't that salt the seasoning prepared for us when we eat here? Do you need half a car's worth of salt for seasoning? Aren't you afraid of being stung? Then what is it for? Li Nanheng inserted the shovel into the ground, supported it with one hand and looked at her. Feng Ling, since you entered the base at the age of 13, where have you learned the cultural classes and field training that the base regularly gave you? Feng Ling stared back at him calmly. Field training doesn't include training on snow mountains and glaciers. Li Nanheng raised his cold brows slightly. Then go get me more salt and sprinkle it on the ground. I'll personally demonstrate for you. Don't dawdle. Go. Li Nanheng looked at Feng Ling, who was skeptical, and gave her a hurried look. Feng Ling had no choice but to turn to the car to get the salt. After moving more than 10 bags of salt back and forth, Li Nanheng said that it was not enough and asked her to continue. Then he asked her to open them all and sprinkle them on the ground. She did as he said. She looked at the salt on the ground and the man who had been standing there watching her sprinkle salt. Feng Ling stood by the side. He did not move and she did not move either. It was past 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Even though the sun could be seen for a while on this snow-capped mountain, the temperature could only rise by 2 or 3 degrees at most. In this kind of frigid environment where the temperature was 30 to 40 degrees below zero, one couldn't feel any warmth at all. However, the salt on the ground gradually melted into the snow. When she saw that the snow was gradually melting, Feng Ling's expression changed. Li Nanheng watched the snow on the ground melt, threw the shovel to her, and walked to the tent where Feng Ling lived alone. Before entering the door he said without looking back, "I'll dig the ice below in an hour. Wait first." After watching the snow melt with her own eyes, Feng Ling did not have any objections. She looked at the melted snow on the ground and the wet snow mixed with salt and snow on the ice and finally remembered that in the base, there was such a saying in survival knowledge. When the temperature of water reached 0 degrees Celsius, it would freeze. If salt was added, the freezing temperature would be lowered. 10% of the salt solution would lower the freezing point to -6 degrees Celsius, and 20% of the salt solution would lower the freezing point to -16 degrees Celsius. This meant that if salt was sprinkled on the frozen road, the ice could be melted. The salt could be dissolved into the liquid water in the ice, thereby lowering the freezing point. Feng Ling raised her hand to rub her face that was slightly red from the cold and took a deep breath. Knowing that in an hour, even if the ice below would not melt so easily, it would definitely be easier to dig than before, so she no longer stood there foolishly and followed him into the tent. When she entered the tent, she saw that Li Nanheng was sitting on the only bed inside. The bed was about 1.5 meters wide. She had slept on it for the past 2 days. There were a lot of quilts and automatic heating blankets piled up next to it. She was about to walk over when she suddenly caught a glimpse of the suitcase under the bed out of the corner of her eye. There were a few pieces of chest wrapping cloth in the suitcase. At this moment, the expression on her face suddenly froze. Chapter 875. Because she lived alone and wore a thick layer of clothing, she did not need to wrap her chest cloth. No one would be able to see the outline of her figure, so she did not wrap it inside her clothes at all. She looked at the box under the bed and quickly walked over. When Li Nanheng got up to pour a cup of hot water, she kicked the box in. When Li Nanheng turned back, she had just withdrawn her foot and looked at him calmly. "Boss, if there is enough salt, can you let Fat Tai and the others use it when they go out to catch fish? It will save a lot of time." Li Nanheng picked up the cup and took a sip of hot water, sneering. "You still want to catch fish? You've only left the base for a few days but you already want to eat meat?" Feng Ling saw that the cup he was using was her own, but she didn't say much. She just said, "I don't feel anything special. Usually, I just eat something to fill my stomach, but they really want to eat. If they want to use it, let them use it. If it's not enough, just tell the person who delivered the supplies to remember to bring it here next time. The man said and took another sip of water. Feng Ling nodded. All right, I understand. I'll tell them later. They haven't come back yet? And it takes a long time to walk down the snow mountain. I think they'll be back in the evening at the earliest. Call them to come back. I can't get through. There's no signal at this time. We have to wait until 7 to 10 p.m. Li Nanheng didn't speak. He put down the cup, glanced at Feng Ling who was standing there, and glanced outside the tent. There's only one bed here? Yes, the 7 of them live in the other tent. The 8th bed can't fit, so I put it here. I'm used to living alone and it's not so noisy here, Feng Ling said as she walked to the bed. Although she didn't do it deliberately, she subconsciously didn't want him to find the things in the box under the bed. There were several pieces of chest cloth there. If he found it, she didn't know if she saw wrong, but when he heard that she lived alone, he seemed to raise his eyebrows slightly and picked up her cup to take a sip of hot water as if he was in a good mood. When she looked carefully again, the man had turned to look around the tent and didn't look at her again. An hour later, the ice outside had indeed melted a little, but after all, it was ice that had accumulated for many years. It was impossible for it to melt much and she still needed to dig. However, when Feng Ling took the tools to dig, she found that the ice was not as hard as before. Instead, it felt much more brittle. With a single hit, a large piece could be cracked and she could easily pry it up with a shovel. In the evening, Fat Tai and the others finally returned. However, their hands were empty, and they all hung their heads dejectedly. They didn't even need to guess to know that they didn't find a river. This place was so big and the ice and snow were so thick. Who knew which layer of ice there was a river? Fat Tai walked in the front and was about to return to the tent to drink water when he suddenly saw that the ground opposite the tent had been cleared of snow. He immediately looked inside in surprise and was about to call Feng Ling out to ask what was going on. However, the moment he opened his mouth, his eyes instantly widened. He looked at the man who walked out of the tent and his eyes were full of surprise. Bo. Boss? Seeing their gloomy expressions through the transparent window of the tent, he wanted to go out, but thinking that Boss Lee would say something to them considering their emotions these 2 days, he thought about it and waited inside for a while. He would go out later. After about 20 minutes, Feng Ling saw Fat Tai turn to walk back. She guessed that he had finished speaking and then walked out. However, the moment she walked out of the tent, she heard Li Nanheng say, "Move all the things over." Move things? Move what? Feng Ling glanced at his back in confusion and then saw that the other members had all turned to walk back. She also looked back, only to see that they were all running toward the large off-road vehicle that Li Nanheng drove over with Fat Tai. Yes, they were running and they seemed to be very excited. She only watched for a while and did not ask more. She was about to return to the tent to boil water when she suddenly heard Fatty's earth-shattering howl. Ah! Barbecue oven. Feng Ling paused and turned to look in that direction. Then Fat Tai and the others screamed in unison. Ah, meat. So much meat. Ah, and shrimp. Ah, so much meat. Ah. Feng Ling, you brought a barbecue oven? She asked. The man turned back, glanced at her, did not answer, and entered the tent ahead of her. Feng Ling, if he wanted to give her warmth, then give her warmth openly. Why did he have to be so arrogant? However, she still smiled. The corners of her lips were curved in a way that even she did not notice. When Fat Tai and the others brought all the things that Li Nanheng brought into the tent, Feng Ling was somewhat dumbfounded. This is dozens of kilograms of meat. Ah no, it seems to be more than 100 kilograms. Earlier, when I opened Boss's car, I was shocked. I didn't expect the back of the car to be filled with so much frozen meat. If we ate with meat and vegetables normally, this would be enough for us to eat for a month. That's right. I didn't expect Boss to be so humane. Knowing that we were starving and freezing here, he specially brought us meat. Oh my, I'm so excited. There's so much meat. Just put it outside. In any case, the temperature here is even colder than the freezer. It definitely won't go bad. Just keep it frozen. When you want to eat it, bring it in to melt and wash it clean. Yes. When I think about how we won't lack meat in the future, I'm relieved that I didn't catch any fish today. Boss, I really love you to death. Fat Tai was agitated and was about to pounce on Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng sat on a chair in the tent. The moment Fat Tai pounced on him, he directly kicked him to the side. Scram. What love? I'm not interested in men. Hey? Boss, you don't mean what you say. Why did I hear? Fat Tai grinned and suddenly glanced at Feng Ling, who was boiling water by the side with a gossipy expression. I heard that boss is very interested in men. Li Nanheng's expression did not change. He only glanced at him coldly and asked word by word, "You listen to me?" "That's right. I'm not the only one who heard it. Everyone in our base knows that boss, that." Fat Tai did not directly point out the name but glanced at Feng Ling again. He then said with a chuckle, "That's right. Anyway, we're not blind. Besides, boss, you came all the way from Los Angeles to this damn place. It's impossible that you just want to send warmth to us." The others immediately followed Fatty's gaze and looked at Feng Ling with doubtful and dumbfounded expressions. Chapter 876. Seeing Feng Ling's expression, Fat Tai knew that Feng Ling was not one to joke around. He shifted his gaze away and moved closer to Li Nanheng with a chuckle. Scram. Li Nanheng frowned and impatiently moved the stool under him away. "Boss," Fat Tai still moved closer shamelessly and said in a low voice that only he could hear, "If you're really here for Feng Ling, we can give you some advice. Putting aside the fact that you're our boss just based on the amount of meat you have, if you're really interested in Feng Ling, we'll definitely help." Before he could finish speaking, Li Nanheng once again kicked him to the side. Fat Tai immediately used his fat body to slam into Dabin, who was behind him. The moment he fell into Dabin's arms, he raised a finger and pinched his throat like a woman. "Io Dabin Gij, your legs are so hard," Dabin's lips twitched. Scram. Laughter immediately filled the tent. Fat Tai scrambled to his feet and snorted coquettishly. After taking 2 steps outside, he suddenly turned back. "Big Bin Gij, come help me light up the charcoal in the grill. Boss even brought us so much charcoal that's easy to burn. These few days the off-road vehicle is practically a treasure trove. Whatever we want, we can get it. Yes, 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 this old man feels like I've reached the pinnacle of life with all this meat. Isn't it easy to reach the pinnacle? It seems like we're just short of a girl. If I can have a girl as my companion, I'm willing to stay in this Rogers Pass forever. I've lived for more than 20 years, but I've never even touched a girl's hand." Fat Tai and Dabin brought the grill in. Everyone sat around the grill and began to install it. They placed the charcoal in the grill and made a tool to guide the smoke out of the tent. They were extremely busy and careful, as if the grill was a rare treasure. If anyone was the slightest bit careless, the people next to them would definitely shout, "Gentler, gentler. Brothers, our happiness these few months depends on it. Don't spoil it. If it's really broken, boss definitely won't send us another one." As they spoke, they deliberately looked back at Li Nanheng, hoping to hear Boss Li say, "It's okay, I'll come again next time." However, Li Nanheng said expressionlessly, "If it's broken, put it on the fire and roast it yourself. Even primitive people can roast meat. You live in this era and can't even eat a piece of meat without this stove? My 11 base doesn't need idiots like you." "Yes, yes, yes. Boss is right. Boss is right. Boss's words are the imperial edict. Boss is our wind vane. Bosses, stop sucking up. Hurry up and light up the stove. We're all hungry." Dabin kicked Fatty's wriggling butt. Afterward, the group of people busily cut off a large piece of frozen meat and brought it in to cut it into smaller pieces. They busied themselves with melting the meat and preparing the seasoning. Feng Ling cooperated by the side to boil water and prepare food. Li Nanheng watched this group of brats who could still find happiness because of such a small amount of food. Although his face was expressionless, there was a trace of warmth in his eyes. The man sat quietly by the side and watched them work. After watching for a while, he turned to look at Feng Ling, who was putting dry seasoning into a plate and making it wet. He looked at the boy who had already taken off his thick winter clothes but was still wearing a thin down jacket and down pants. He then looked at her slightly pink face under the light of the fire. Li Nanheng did not speak. He casually picked up a cigarette and lighter, stood up and walked out of the tent. The tent was bustling with noise for a long time. When the meat was almost cooked, the group of people happily sat where they were. Apart from the fact that they could not drink alcohol, this barbecue was perfect. They were here to guard against the mafia lurking nearby. Even if they did not need to train every day, they absolutely could not drink alcohol. Regardless of day or night, they had to maintain absolute sobriety. Otherwise, if there was really an enemy nearby, it would be too late to defend. Where did boss go? That's right. Where's boss? Wasn't he there earlier? The few of them glanced at the position where Li Nanheng had previously sat but did not see him. Earlier, they were all busy preparing the meat and did not notice when boss had left. Feng Ling prepared the seasoning and handed it to them. She also turned to look at the position where Li Nanheng had previously sat. After standing silently for a moment, She picked up the winter clothes by the side, put them on, and walked out. When she walked out of the tent, she did not see Boss. At this time of night, the wind was even stronger and colder. It was extremely cold. She put on her hat and zipped up completely. She walked out and finally saw a faint orange light on the cliff of the snowy mountain in front of her. Someone was smoking there. She walked over. When she walked behind the man, she glanced at the snow behind him. It was snowing again. The footprints he had left when he walked here had been half covered by the snow. It could be seen that he had been standing here for a while. Boss, the meat is almost ready. You drove all the way from the center of Montana. I guess you haven't eaten anything yet. Go in and eat. Feng Ling walked up and stood by the man's side. Li Nanheng stood against the wind and snow, casually put out the cigarette butt, and slowly exhaled a thin layer of smoke from his mouth. In this environment, it was hard to tell whether what he exhaled was smoke or breath. However, under the pure white snow, the sea at the border of Montana could not be seen in the distance. Most of it was covered by glaciers and ice, and they could not see the end of it. Behind them there were a few tents with a few lights. It was like their camp here, and it was like a warm place to return to. Because of the snow, even though it was night, with the lights behind them and the moonlight in the sky, the entire world was not so dark. Even the man stood here quietly, as though he had left the world and stood alone. His tall and straight figure made one's heart tremble. In this kind of damn place, the snow scenery is not bad. The night is not bad either. The man did not look at her but looked into the distance. It's rare to see an endless glacier. I originally thought that most of the glaciers here were steep cliffs. It looks good now. It's not so steep. Chapter 877. Li Nanheng heard a hint of provocation in her tone. Perhaps it wasn't a provocation, but at least her heart was really calm. She didn't even feel that this place was torturous. Instead, it became a kind of enjoyment. He glanced at her coldly. Feng Ling was originally shorter than him. Now that she was wearing thick clothes, she was bulging like a little black bear in a spacesuit. The sarcastic words that were about to come out of her mouth were replaced by, "Why should I rub your sharpness? Everyone who came out of 11 base should have the sharpness that comes out of the base. There's no need to polish your edges and corners." Feng Ling didn't speak. She looked behind her and was about to urge him to go back to eat barbecue with her. However, the man turned his head and looked into the distance. He asked mildly, "After living for more than 20 years, I find that whether it's stepping on landmines to traverse the jungle or charging into the enemy's camp under the barrel of a terrorist's gun, I don't have more courage than admitting that I like you. So, you'd rather raise your gun and be punished to this kind of place? Is it because you like women and have no interest in me?" Feng Ling, "Boss, this cold wind is biting cold. Even with such thick clothes, I feel cold standing here. Let's not talk about this topic, okay?" Feng Ling swallowed and did not speak. She was a man, of course she should like women. However, the key point was that she was not a man. Right now she was very conflicted. She didn't know what it meant to like someone, but she seemed to feel that she liked him. Why did she resist? It was probably because she wasn't prepared at all when she was suddenly stamped. Besides, Bosley was usually the boss in her eyes, but if she really didn't like him, not to mention that night in his room, if any man dared to press her against the wall and kiss her when they were out on a mission in the bar, she would probably slap him in the face. There was only the howling of the cold wind. There was no reply from Feng Ling. Li Nanheng seemed to have long been used to her avoiding the topic. He only looked at her mildly. "If you don't want to talk about me, then let's talk about you. A 17-year-old boy like you, do you like a fussy little girl like Qin Shuk? Or a slightly more intellectual and approachable type like Wen Liqing?" "Boss, I've only met that Qin Shuk twice. How could I like her? In my eyes, Miss Qin is a very lively and cheerful girl. If she is willing to be my friend, I may accept it, but if it's a relationship, it's definitely impossible." Feng Ling raised her hand to cover her painful face with her sleeve and said in a muffled voice, "Boss, I've only met that Qin Shuk twice." As she spoke, she thought of Dr. Wen's sister and said, "As for Miss Wen, even if I like her, it one of me of her. Of boss, it is definitely not a boss." Li Nanheng was about to take another cigarette and put his hand in his trouser pocket. Hearing her words, he paused and turned his deep black eyes to her. "Me and her? Boss, Li of. He of Ling of Li of Li of Li of boss, of boss of Nanoff of Li of the Ling of you of. And boss, you seem to be very patient with others, but you seem to be very patient with Miss Wen, and you seem to be very familiar with her." Li Nanheng took out his hand but did not take out the cigarette. He only sneered, So that day you stood at the door of the infirmary for so long, and this is all you saw? Feng Ling retracted her gaze from his face and turned to look at the glacier in the distance. I didn't stand for long. I just went over to take a look. I didn't want to disturb your conversation. Li Nanheng snorted. Wen Liqing often comes to the base, but it has nothing to do with me. I have always hated those women who pester me like sticky candy. Usually, when I return to the Li family to attend various occasions, I will avoid those women. So far, no woman dares to sneak into the base to pester me. 11 base is not a place that anyone can enter. Then for a woman to come to a place like 11 base so frequently, of course, the only reason is for a man but not for me. She and I are just childhood friends and we are very familiar with each other. And because she doesn't have any bad intentions towards me and is just a friend, I don't have any wariness towards her. After Feng Ling slowly digested his words, her head seemed to be covered with a layer of doubt. Then who is she doing this for? There are so many men in this base and most of them are very outstanding, but I don't see her having too much contact with any of them. It was rare to see Feng Ling's curious eyes. Li Nanheng smiled, glanced at her curious expression and said to her mercifully, for Dr. Wen. Feng Ling's eyes were filled with curiosity. She was very curious. Feng Ling's expression first changed to one of confusion, then surprise and finally shock. Isn't Dr. Wen her brother? Yes. Then she did this for Dr. Wen? Feng Ling's brain was a bit confused for a moment. Li Nanheng didn't explain much but just said, I don't know how to explain it, but Wen Liqing has been chasing after Dr. Wen for so many years. Her brother studied medicine and she also studied medicine. In order to avoid her, Dr. Wen would rather give up a good job and work in the infirmary of 11 base. Wen Liqing also ignored Dr. Wen's advice and often ran to the base. Seeing that she was also a doctor, the base gave her special privileges and allowed her to enter. If it were anyone else, it would be impossible for them to have such an opportunity to enter and exit at will. So Wen Liqing was chasing after her brother? How could biological siblings pursue each other? After chasing after him, could biological siblings fall in love and marry each other? Although she was puzzled, after all, it had nothing to do with her. Feng Ling didn't know why when she heard that Wen Liqing had nothing to do with Boss Li, the lump in her heart suddenly seemed to be so tight and uncomfortable. She changed the topic. Boss, if we don't go in we will be buried here by the snow. As she spoke, she glanced at the footprints behind her, which had almost been covered by the snow, leaving only faint footprints. Seeing that Feng Ling was wearing such thick clothes and had been covering her face with her cuffs, but her forehead and cheeks were still faintly red because of the wind, Li Nanheng didn't say more and turned to go back. Feng Ling also went back. Chapter 878. The sky grew darker and the wind and snow outside grew heavier. Thankfully the tent was sturdy and warm so it was not affected at all. Feng Ling placed the meat they had left on the stove and roasted it for another minute to heat it up. She then placed it on Li Nanheng's plate, piece by piece. She only kept a few pieces for herself. She was about to place the plate down when she found that the side had not been touched. She turned to look at Li Nanheng, who had been sitting quietly by the side without eating. Boss, why aren't you eating? I've been on the road for a whole day. I don't have an appetite, the man said as he placed the plate of meat in front of her. You eat. Fat Tai, De Bin and the others. Was this a public display of male and female dog food? Ahem boss, it's almost 9 o'clock now. I'll return to the tent next door first. You and Feng Ling eat first. After one of them finished speaking, the others all found their own excuses. In less than a few minutes they all left. Feng Ling looked at the few prawns on the grill and then at the plate in front of her. She picked up a piece of meat and placed it in her mouth. She then turned to the man sitting by the side. Boss, I don't usually eat much meat. I can't eat so much. This place is very cold, especially after midnight. If you don't eat something, your resistance to the cold will be very poor. You should eat some. Seeing that she really did not have an appetite, Li Nanheng reached out to take the chopsticks in her hand and the plate. After eating about 5 or 6 pieces of meat with her chopsticks, he placed the chopsticks and plate back in her hand. Feng Ling, eat it all. He glanced at the remaining pieces of meat. Feng Ling looked at the chopsticks he had just used and thought for a moment before putting them down. She was about to pick up a new pair of chopsticks when she hesitated. There weren't many pieces left, and there seemed to be no need to specially pick up a new pair of chopsticks. Furthermore, Boss was the one who did not care about trifles. She also saw herself as a man. There was no need to be so fussy. Thus she picked up the chopsticks again. As she ate, she picked up the prawns on the grill and placed them on the plate in front of him. This time, Li Nanheng did not refuse and went to peel the prawns. Just as Feng Ling finished the meat on the plate and was about to put down the plate, suddenly, several peeled prawns were thrown over and landed right in the middle of the plate. Eat these too. After saying that, the man got up and went to find water to extinguish the burning charcoal in the stove. Feng Ling did not speak. She watched as the man stood up to tidy up the grill and silently ate the prawns. Seeing that she obediently sat there to eat, Li Nanheng was in a good mood and actually began to work. He took out the oven that was extinguished and cooled not long after and then went to clean up the things on the ground. Seeing that boss actually took the initiative to help her, Feng Ling silently stood up again to help clean up. When the tent was cleaned up and Li Nanheng walked in again, Feng Ling realized a very serious problem. "Boss, are you going to stay on this snowy mountain tonight?" Li Nanheng casually brushed the snow off his body and coldly glanced at her as if she was talking nonsense. Feng Ling immediately glanced at the tent next door. "It's warmer in a tent with more people. Try to squeeze a little more. There should be a bed. I'll go tell them to prepare a quilt for you." With that, Feng Ling walked out. Li Nanheng coldly glanced at her. "Don't you have a seat in this tent?" Sure enough, he still couldn't avoid staying in her place. Feng Ling looked at the suitcase under the bed worriedly. "Then boss, I'll go get you a foldable bed," Feng Ling said and was about to go out again. "Moving those things on your bed will save you more energy than running to find a foldable bed. Can't two people sleep on a bed that is 1.5 meters wide?" Feng Ling suddenly paused. In a blink of an eye, she saw that Li Nanheng had walked to the bedside and was about to move the things she piled up on the bedside. Her heart skipped a beat. The breast binding cloth was in the suitcase, but among the things she put on the bedside, there seemed to be a sanitary pad in it. "Boss." Feng Ling suddenly rushed forward, and held the things on the bed in her arms. "I'll collect my things myself. Boss, stand by the side and wait for a while. I'll put them away soon." Seeing her rare initiative and enthusiasm, Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows and took a step back. Feng Ling carried the things off the bed and placed them on the table. She secretly scolded herself for not putting the sanitary pads under the bed. The others were all careless and wouldn't notice anything, let alone touch her things. However, she didn't expect that Boss Li would suddenly come and even stay here. He would even sleep on her bed. She didn't even have the time to refuse to sleep on the same bed when her attention was diverted. After putting the things away, she looked up and saw that Li Nanheng had sat on the bed and casually taken off his coat. Feng Ling lowered her head with a headache and raised her hand to rub her forehead. "Headache? Uncomfortable?" The man's voice suddenly rang. She abruptly put down her hand. "No, my forehead was a little itchy just now, so I scratched it." With that, she stood up. Because she had to go back and forth to deliver the things outside the tent, she was still wearing the thick winter clothes, and her movements were a little clumsy. She turned to see that Li Nanheng had already taken off his clothes and was only wearing a black t-shirt. His slim and shapely waist under the t-shirt made her feel like committing a crime. Feng Ling turned her eyes away and looked outside. "I heard from Fat Tai that although this place is cold, the ground is covered with snow. It's easy to melt the snow into water and then put it on the water to take a shower, so it doesn't affect your washing. I've been on the road for a whole day. You don't mind if I take a shower here, do you?" Even though the man said so, he had already stood up and walked to the corner of the tent that was separated from the rest. There was a simple bathroom. Because it was for Feng Ling's own use, she made it very clean and there were all kinds of toiletries. The man walked in and could vaguely smell the faint fragrance of shower gel, which was very similar to the smell on Feng Ling's body. He took off his shirt and walked out to find a towel, only to see that Feng Ling was lying on the ground by the bed and was about to touch the suitcase under the bed. She seemed very anxious and strained. Chapter 879. Feng Ling was surprised and turned to see the man who took off his shirt and came out. She thought he was going to take a shower and wouldn't come out in a short time. She quickly moved her hand away from the suitcase, glanced at the man's naked upper body, coughed and said, "Boss, I'm looking for clothes for you to change into." "No, I brought some." The man turned around and walked to the table. He picked up a black bag with unknown contents and took out a new t-shirt and a pair of loose and comfortable shorts from it. Feng Ling's eyelids twitched. It turned out that the bag he took down when he asked Fat Tai and the others to get the oven was filled with clothes for him to change into. "Boss." She slowly stood up by the bed, stared at the clothes in his hand and asked, "Didn't you only stay here for one night? How long do you plan to stay here?" Li Nanheng walked towards the bathroom and said indifferently, After I sent you here, the US military informed me that there are a lot of mafia members stationed nearby. Although there are no movements, I came to accompany you for a while in case you really encounter any danger." With that, the man didn't explain more and went straight into her simple small bathroom. "I came to accompany you for a while. For a while." That was to say, how long he would stay here depended on his mood. It could be as short as 2 or 3 days, or as long as 2 or 3 months. Feng Ling secretly took a deep breath and then looked at the bed beside her that could really sleep 2 people, and her eyelids twitched again. If boss really planned to stay here for a while, she had to find a way to get a folding bed. Otherwise, it was really not safe to sleep in the same bed like this. After all, she had learned a lesson from the past. She went to his room to deliver wine. He was clearly sober, but he could still do that to her. If they continued to stay here, even if Boss Lee was not a lecherous man in Feng Ling's eyes, something would definitely happen. She couldn't live with the other 7 people. Otherwise, it would be easy for them to find out that she was different, but if she lived with Boss, it would be more dangerous. Right now, they couldn't move to another place to live, but they also couldn't blatantly force their boss to live there. Feng Ling leaned down again tiredly, but she didn't dare to take the suitcase away, because Boss Lee should have noticed her movements just now. When he came out again, if he saw that the suitcase had been moved, it would definitely arouse his suspicion, so she might as well put it down. Even if he wanted to put on the chest wrapping cloth, he would have to wait until tomorrow when he left the tent. She glanced at her winter clothes again and stood by the bed in a daze for a while. Hearing the sound of water coming from the simple bathroom, she instantly remembered what Li Nanheng said that day. "What do you think I'm going to do in the bathroom?" Feng Ling's ears suddenly turned hot. She turned and walked out. After running 4 or 5 laps outside the tent, she sat in the white snow, leaned back and lay in the snow looking at the stars in the sky. Although it was located on the border of Montana, although there were many cliffs and cliffs here, although it was very, very cold, it was still under the same sky. Whether it was in Los Angeles or here, the stars at night would not change. She lay for a long time, but the coldness made it impossible for her to fall asleep. Feng Ling just looked at the white breath she exhaled and didn't move. Until she heard the creaking sound of walking, which was the sound of people walking in this place she had been used to these days. Before she turned her face, she saw that Li Nanheng had come into her sight. The man had taken a shower and changed his clothes. He was only wearing a slightly thick black uniform and did not wear winter clothes. With his hands in his trouser pockets, he stepped on the snow and walked to her side, looking down at the boy lying on the ground. "What? Do you think I occupied your bed? Are you going to use the sky as your bed?" Feng Ling abruptly sat up and patted the snow off her sleeves and legs. Then she hugged her heavy clothes and struggled to stand up from the ground. She shook off the snow on her body and looked up at him. "Boss, are you done showering?" Li Nanheng glanced at her. "And aren't you going in to take a shower?" "I won't wash it. Rogers Pass is not as good as the base. Even if there is no shortage of water and it's convenient to take a bath, it's too extravagant to take a bath 2 or 3 times a day. Besides, you won't sweat in such a place and you're always clean and refreshed. It's okay if you don't take a bath once or twice." Li Nanheng watched as the little black bear stumbled to the entrance of the tent and walked in with a muffled voice. He smiled and confirmed that Feng Ling really didn't plan to bathe tonight. Without saying anything, he turned and walked back. The temperature in the tent was quite warm. Li Nanheng took off his black combat suit jacket and lay down on the bed wearing only a short-sleeved black t-shirt and shorts. After lying down, he tried the softness and hardness of the bed under him. It was not bad. For comfort and cold resistance, the bed was quite thick and it was very comfortable to lie on. "Do you sleep outside or inside?" The man rested his head on his arms and looked very comfortable. He glanced at Feng Ling, who was still standing by the door like a bear. At first, Feng Ling thought he was referring to the outside or inside of the tent. She was about to speak when she realized that he was referring to the outside or inside of the bed. She glanced at the bed. "I'll sleep outside. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll disturb boss's rest when I wake up at night." Li Nanheng shifted his body into the bed. However, the man was tall and had long legs. The 1.5 meter by 1.8 meter wide bed seemed a little small under him. Fortunately, there was a table at the end of the bed. Otherwise, he would have no place to put his feet when lying on it. "It's late. Go to bed early." The man rested his head on his arms and said lightly. Then he closed his eyes. He had been on the road for a whole day, so he must be tired. Feng Ling didn't say anything but walked inside. Although she didn't take a bath, she took off her winter clothes and went in to wash her face and brush her teeth. When she came out of the bathroom, she put on the thick winter clothes again. She saw that Bosley had been sleeping quietly on the bed for a while and didn't move for a long time. She didn't know whether he was asleep or not. When she and Kay went out on a mission, they lay in a mud ditch together for a night and heard Kay's earth-shattering snoring, but Bosley didn't have that kind of annoying snoring sound when he slept. Chapter 880. As soon as she covered him with the quilt, the man said with his eyes closed, "Why aren't you sleeping?" Feng Ling paused. "I'm going to sleep right away." Li Nanheng opened his eyes, glanced at her, and then at the quilt she had just covered him with. He smiled faintly and said lightly, "Sleep early." Feng Ling grunted and lay down. Li Nanheng vaguely heard the sound of clothes rubbing against the bed. He frowned and opened his eyes to look at her, only to see that she was lying down in her winter clothes. "You're going to sleep without taking off your clothes?" Feng Ling had already laid on the pillow. She tidied up her bulky clothes and answered in a lying position. "Well, I may have caught a cold these days. I'm a little afraid of the cold, and it will be very cold in the middle of the night." "Boss, you can sleep with the quilt. I'll sleep like this." "You're afraid of the cold? Why did you lie in the snow for so long?" "I just went out to get some fresh air. When I was tired I lay down. Anyway, the clothes are very thick, and the temperature of the snow won't penetrate the clothes." "It doesn't affect me lying in the snow," Feng Ling explained indifferently. Li Nanheng looked at the thick clothes on her and said coldly, "Take off your clothes." Feng Ling pretended not to hear him, closed her eyes and fell asleep. "I told you to take off your clothes and pretend to be deaf, en?" The man's tone was obviously displeased. Feng Ling had to open her eyes. "Boss, I'm really afraid of the cold." "If you're afraid of the cold, cover yourself with the quilt. Who wears such thick clothes to sleep? Don't you feel uncomfortable?" "It's not uncomfortable. It's okay. I'm used to it. I've slept like this occasionally these days." Li Nanheng didn't speak anymore but turned over and faced her. He crossed his arms over his chest and stared at her. Feng Ling remained lying flat. Anyway, she couldn't take off her clothes. She didn't wrap her chest cloth inside. If she took it off and lay next to him like this, if he made any other movements he would easily see through her. Even if she wanted to take it off, she had to wait until she wrapped the chest cloth around her body tomorrow. She pretended not to see the man who had turned sideways and lay flat with her eyes closed. "Are you sure you want to sleep like this?" "Yeah, I'm sure." Li Nanheng narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "Why are you wearing so many layers? Are you afraid that I will touch you, or do you feel insecure sleeping in the same bed with me? Do you have to wear so many layers of clothes to feel comfortable?" "Boss, I'm just afraid of the cold," Feng Ling insisted and did not explain further. "If you're afraid of the cold, then you haven't done enough cold resistance training." Li Nanheng snorted. "And maybe..." Feng Ling didn't want to say more. Bosley was a smart man. She was afraid that the more she said, the more mistakes she would make. Seeing that she was going to sleep with her eyes closed, Li Nanheng didn't speak anymore. He turned back to lie flat and closed his eyes, but he still said coldly, "Whatever." Feng Ling heaved a sigh of relief in her heart and did not speak again. It was extremely quiet in the tent. Wearing such a thick winter suit was indeed uncomfortable, not to mention whether it was hot or cold, but with such a thick suit, it was difficult for her to even turn over when she was sleeping. If she turned over too loudly, it would definitely disturb the people next to her. Halfway through her sleep, she woke up with a start because she couldn't turn over. She then closed her eyes and continued to sleep. However, this time she suddenly heard some movements. Feng Ling opened her eyes vigilantly. Before he could react, he suddenly felt a pain in his waist and he was kicked off the bed. Her clothes were thick, so she didn't feel any pain when she fell to the ground, but she was still shocked. When she realized who had kicked her, she staggered to stand up and looked at the man who was still lying calmly on the bed. "Boss." Li Nanheng closed his eyes and said flatly, "It's too crowded." Feng Ling's brows twitched. She glanced at the bed under him. Her clothes did take up a lot of space, but even if it was a little crowded, it was too much to kick her off the bed. She didn't speak but pressed her coat hard. Anyway, this kind of winter clothes looked bulging, but as long as she pressed it, it would be flatter and save a lot of space. After pressing it, she lay back on the bed and said aggrievedly, "Boss, don't kick me anymore." The man didn't respond and seemed to be asleep again. She closed her eyes and continued to sleep. However, less than 5 minutes later, with a thud, Feng Ling was kicked off the bed again. Feng Ling, who was lying on the ground. She was angry but didn't want to provoke him, so she didn't say anything. She reached out to take the pillow off the bed and lay on the ground to continue sleeping. Anyway, the clothes were very thick, so it didn't matter if she lay on the ground. This time the man finally sat up. He lowered his eyes to look at Feng Ling, who was lying on the bed calmly, as though she was going to deal with whatever came her way. Sensing the man's gaze, Feng Ling opened her eyes on the ground and looked into his eyes. Is it comfortable lying on the ground? It's okay. The clothes are thick. I don't feel anything. Well, I plan to ask you to bring in another folding bed tomorrow night. It seems that there's no need to be so troublesome. In the future, as long as I'm here for a day, I'll sleep on the bed and you'll sleep on the ground. Feng Ling was silent for a moment and then sat up. She raised her hand and scratched her messy hair. Boss, do you have to be so mean to me? It's just a sleep. Li Nanheng was expressionless. Indeed, it's just a sleep. Do you have to be so careful that you can't even take off your outermost winter clothes? Feng Ling was speechless. She pursed her lips and suddenly stood up from the ground. Forget it, I won't sleep. Boss, you sleep by yourself. Li Nanheng looked at her angry expression and was about to speak when he saw Feng Ling casually pick up a folded military chair, bring it to the entrance of the tent and put it down against the door. Then she sat on the chair and didn't move. It seemed that she didn't want to sleep and planned to keep vigil for him. Li Nanheng looked at her messy little head and then at her angry face, and his brows moved. He just wanted Feng Ling to take off her clothes and sleep. Even if she didn't need to take off all her clothes, she didn't need to wear such thick clothes. The clothes were so big on her body that she would suffocate to death if she didn't pay attention. It was clearly for her own good. Why was Feng Ling so angry? You're not going to sleep? He looked in that direction and asked. Feng Ling didn't speak but pulled the hat up again and put it on her head, looking as though she didn't hear him and didn't feel annoyed. From the looks of it, she was really angry. Li Nanheng couldn't help glancing at the ground under the bed. Chapter 881. In the dead of night, one was lying on the bed and the other was sitting on the chair and no one spoke. No matter what Li Nanheng said, Feng Ling ignored him. In the end, the man didn't say anything and let her continue to sit there. However, in the middle of the night, Li Nanheng opened his eyes and saw that Feng Ling, who had been sitting there for a long time, had not moved. He guessed that she must have fallen asleep on the chair. Li Nanheng got up, got out of bed, walked over slowly and came to the chair. He looked down at Feng Ling, who had fallen asleep with her eyes closed for a while, and then looked at her heavy clothes and the big hat on her head. With Feng Ling's vigilance, if he carried her to the bed now, she would definitely wake up. But looking at her sleeping posture, even if she could fall asleep, her neck would probably be sore tomorrow morning. Li Nanheng sighed, turned back to the bed, picked up the pillow, came over, gently held her head forward, and then put the soft pillow behind her neck and on the back of the chair. After making sure that she could sleep more comfortably, he stopped. Although the arrival of Boss Li brought them good food, their physical slack finally ended. Early the next morning, in the first training session after coming to Rogers Pass, the group of people was so cold that their faces and noses turned red. The point was that they were not allowed to wear cold-proof clothes, including Feng Ling. According to Boss Li's request, it was to prevent their physique from causing diseases in the low-temperature environment if they lived in such a place for a long time, so they must strengthen cold resistance training every day. The first day of training was only to take off the cold-proof clothes and stand in the snow in the wind and snow wearing the down jacket inside. On the second day of training, they had to take off the down jacket until they could stand in the wind and snow in the vest for an hour. This kind of inhuman cold training was done in every country's army, but 11 Base was located in a hot place in Los Angeles, and they had not been exposed to such an extremely cold area for many years, so they were not well trained in cold resistance training. What Boss Li meant was that since the conditions of this place were so good, they could do cold resistance training. The group of people grumbled in their hearts, but they didn't dare to say a single word. After all, there was meat to eat by following their boss. If they really got frostbite, their boss would definitely take responsibility. They didn't have to worry at all. After 3 days of cold-resistant training, although at the beginning, everyone was covered in tears and snot, and their eyelashes were covered in a thick layer of frost, but after 3 days they didn't even need to wear winter clothes when they walked out of the tent, and they were no longer as afraid of the cold as when they first arrived. After 3 days of training, Li Nanheng was not as devilish as he was in the base, so they could rest for the next 2 days. Taking advantage of the 2 days of rest, everyone insisted on finding a river to catch fish. De Bin had lived in the north since he was young. He described the fish caught from the river under the ice as having a lot of thick and delicious meat. This group of people was extremely greedy. Since they had nothing to do, they still wanted to find it. Feng Ling didn't want to go, but Li Nanheng was dragged away by the 7 people. Before he left, he also dragged her with him. Since Boss had gone, it wouldn't be right if she didn't go, so she had to follow a group of people to find a river to look for food. In fact, in addition to glaciers, there were many rivers around the Rogers Pass, but a few days ago when they came down to look for it, they went in the wrong direction. This time they directly brought an electronic map and a compass, found the location of the river, and began to study how to cut through the thick ice. The ice was much thicker than the ice on the mountain. They didn't have professional tools to cut through the ice, and the method of using salt to melt the ice was not particularly useful and time-consuming. But fortunately there were many of them. In twos and threes they took turns to find a fixed place on the river and began to dig. About 2 hours later the thick ice was cut a lot. Lying on the surface and listening carefully, they could vaguely hear the sound of the river below. Continue. Continue. We'll be able to catch fish soon. Fatai was very excited. Hearing the sound of water, he picked up the tool and stood on it to continue to dig. Be careful. The layer of ice around here has already cracked a few places because we've used too much strength. If you continue to smash down like this, it'll be dangerous if other places suddenly crack before this piece is broken. Someone beside him reminded him. It's okay. The ice is so thick. We haven't broken it for a long time. If it can really crack so easily, we'll... As Fatai spoke, he ferociously poked the tool into the ice hole again. The moment he finally poked it open, before he could even rejoice, the ice under his feet, which already showed signs of cracking, shook, and his fat body instantly fell into the cracked ice hole. Help! Be careful! A group of people rushed over, but the moment they rushed over, they found that the surrounding ice had already cracked. If they all rushed over, it was possible that the whole piece of ice would fall down. Fatty's body had already been immersed in the ice water, and his 2 hands grasped the ice beside him tightly, shouting for help. Just when they hesitated for less than 5 seconds, Fatty's hands could no longer hold the ice. With a cry of despair, his hands slipped down. Fatai. Feng Ling saw that it was too late and was about to rush over, but someone moved faster than her and held Fatty's hand. Boss, save me. Fatai was so scared that his tears almost fell out. He raised his eyes and saw that the person who suddenly rushed over was Nanheng. He immediately cried out as if he had seen his biggest savior. Boss, I don't want to freeze to death here. Boss, save me. Shut up. Nanheng's expression was ugly. Fatty's weight was not something an ordinary person could bear. Furthermore, he was only using the strength of his wrist. He furrowed his brows and turned back to shout at the others who rushed over, "Don't come over. If there are too many people, the ice will crack. Hold me from the back." All right. Feng Ling followed the others and pulled them from the back with all her strength. However, her eyes were fixed on Nanheng's wrist that was forcefully holding onto Fatty's wrist. Less than half a month ago, his ligament had been strained. The doctor had specially said that he couldn't use any strength in a short period of time. But now, not only was he using strength, but he was also holding onto Fatty's hand with all his might. Fatty's weight was close to 280 kilograms. Feng Ling's eyes trembled. Among the group, she was the lightest. It shouldn't be a problem to add her weight to the ice. She suddenly let go of his hand and rushed over. Chapter 882. The moment she rushed over, Feng Ling fell forward and grabbed Li Nanheng's wrist without hesitation. Boss, your hand? Li Nanheng saw that she had rushed over and immediately furrowed his brows. What are you doing here? Go to the back. Feng Ling did not speak. She gripped his wrists tightly with both hands to reduce the damage to his wrists caused by Fatty's heavy weight. Li Nanheng glanced at Feng Ling's actions and furrowed his brows again. He held Fatty's hand with one hand and raised his other to shove her away. Scram to the back. I'm the lightest here. There's not much difference even if you add my weight. Feng Ling stubbornly held onto his wrist. Boss, move your hand away. I'll pull him up with you. You can't use too much strength alone. Otherwise, your hand will really be crippled in the future. Boss. Fatty's body was mostly submerged in the water. He was cold and afraid, and his face was pale from the cold. The others were still exerting strength from the back. However, the ice surface was extremely slippery. Due to their unstable footing, they could only exert a small amount of strength. Feng Ling held Li Nanheng's wrist and continued to pull him up until Fatty's upper body was out. However, he was already frozen stiff and could not climb out on his own. He could only rely on everyone's strength to pull him out. From start to finish, it took a total of 10 minutes. Fatai was finally completely pulled out of the crack in the ice. His fat body was dragged to the side. His body was extremely cold, but his eyes were filled with tears after escaping death. He panted heavily and said, "Thank you, boss. You scared me to death." Dabin and the others were about to come over to check on Li Nanheng's hand. However, seeing that Feng Ling was still by boss's side, they did not go over. They turned to look at Fat Tai, who was lying on the ice, and rushed over. They wrapped their winter coats tightly around Fatty's body. The others also did the same. After all, Fatty's entire body was soaked in water. If he continued to freeze like this, even if he did not fall into the water, he would most likely freeze to death on the way back. "How's your wrist? Did you injure yourself again?" Feng Ling stood by Li Nanheng's side. Seeing that his hand was hanging by his side, she reached out to pull his hand up and at the same time, pressed his wrist a few times. Sure enough, she saw that the man's originally expressionless face had a trace of whiteness. Li Nanheng glanced at her with a dark expression and was about to withdraw his hand, but Feng Ling held him tightly. "Boss, your wrist won't do. Get Dabin and the others to drive you back to Montana and find a hospital. Or get Dr. Wen to fly over to Montana." As Feng Ling spoke, she used her two hands to hold his wrist tightly to help warm his wrist joints. She definitely couldn't let the already strained area suffer any coldness again. "It's not as serious as you think." Li Nanheng calmly looked at the pair of small hands on his wrist that were slightly red from the cold. His expression did not change as he coldly said, "Move your hands away. I'm going to check on Fat Tai. Fat Tai has Dabin and the rest." Feng Ling also turned to look. Seeing that they had already lifted Fat Tai, who was lying on the ground, she finally retracted her gaze to look at him. "Let's go back first." Li Nanheng did not speak more. He directly turned to leave. Unexpectedly, when he turned, Feng Ling did not release his wrist. She simply turned in a circle, still holding onto his wrist tightly. He glanced at her again, his gaze so dark that it seemed boundless. Feng Ling was still focused on his wrist. Even as they walked back, she carefully protected his wrist. As they walked, she tugged out a section of her wide and long sleeve and wrapped it around his wrist. Then she hid both their hands in her wide sleeve. She kept holding on to him tightly as they walked back. If it weren't for the fact that Boss's wrist had been injured previously, Feng Ling would have thought that the two of them were secretly holding hands under their sleeves. This scene was harmonious no matter how one looked at it. However, Fat Tai was so cold that he was grimacing in pain. This scene was harmonious no matter how one looked at it, but Fat Tai was grimacing in cold. As he was being carried away, he said with a face full of pain, "After chiseling the ice for so long, I finally broke it, but not only did I not catch a single fish, I almost threw myself into the ice to feed the fish. Am I going to become paralyzed from the cold just like that? Right now, aside from the cold, I can't feel anything. I seem to be very numb. Am I crippled?" "Shut up. Who gave you the courage to bring your nearly 300 kilograms of fat to the edge of the ice that was about to split open? If it were anyone else standing on it, they might not be able to do such a thing." The brothers mocked him but still carefully carried him all the way into the tent. Then they stripped Fat Tai clean from head to toe, wrapped the electric blanket around him, and wiped his limbs with a towel dipped in hot water. The group of men busied themselves, but they knew that at this time, with Boss by Feng Ling's side, they could not interfere, so they could only work around this pig. On the other side, Feng Ling pushed Li Nanheng into the tent. She directly dragged him to the bed and sat him down. Then she turned around to search for a long time. She remembered that the things they brought were only some daily cold medicine, anti-inflammatory medicine, and some frostbite ointment. There was no other medicine for injuries and this kind of auxiliary medicine that could be used to massage and treat joints. Li Nanheng sat by the bed. His wrist was indeed very painful, but the situation was urgent. Even if he really had to cripple this hand, he could not watch as something happened to his men. He watched as Feng Ling anxiously rummaged through the things here. Seeing that she had lost her composure and was so anxious because of him, he didn't say anything and just sat by the bed to watch her. "There's no medicine." Feng Ling walked back. Her expression was not very good. "I'll call the base right now and have them send a helicopter over to pick you up." "There's no need. I've said it before." "It's not that serious," Li Nanheng interrupted her. "It's been a while since I pulled my ligaments. Cold compresses are useless now, so I can only apply hot compresses. The effect of hot compresses is similar to applying medicine and massaging, but it will take a longer time. Bring me a hot towel and the knee pad that Dabin wore today. Wrap it around my wrist. I'll be fine after resting for a while. It's not that troublesome." Chapter 883. Will this really work? She didn't really believe his words. Li Nanheng glanced at her coldly. "It's my wrist. How can I endure the pain?" Just do what I tell you to do. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Feng Ling, oh. He was right. He couldn't possibly allow his wrist to be crippled just like that. She quickly went to get a hot towel for him and then went to find a bin to ask for the knee pad that automatically heated up. She didn't know where it came from. To her surprise, the knee pad really could heat up when placed in her hands. Feng Ling studied it for a while and found that there was a hidden button with a battery inside. No wonder it could heat up. After taking it back, she wrapped the towel around Li Nanheng's wrist, and then wrapped the knee pad that automatically heated up outside the towel. She made sure that the towel would always maintain a suitable temperature. Not only could it be used as a hot compress, but it could also be used to fix his wrist in place to prevent the ligaments from pulling and injuring him again. Li Nanheng's wrist was seriously injured. In addition, although Fatty's life was saved, he had a serious cold and was bedridden the entire day. He had a fever and coughed, causing the people in the two tents to be extremely busy. Especially when it was time to eat, they all came out to help each other, thinking of ways to make porridge and other light dishes. Li Nanheng was not as troublesome as Fat Tai. Although it was his right hand that was injured, every time it was mealtime, Feng Ling would take the initiative to come over. She would either give him a spoon so that it would be more convenient for him to eat, or she would simply help him pick up food and place it in his bowl in front of him. In the beginning, Li Nanheng said that he didn't need her, but after he got used to it, he didn't even need a spoon and waited for her to feed him. Feng Ling saw that his wrist was indeed in so much pain that he couldn't move. Although she felt that it was inappropriate, she still fed him. She treated him as a child in his 20s and fed him. As time went by, Li Nanheng even needed her help to put on and take off his coat. Throughout the day, aside from going to the toilet, Feng Ling helped him with almost everything else. Night fell again. Because of his wrist injury last night, Li Nanheng didn't take a shower. Obviously, he couldn't take a shower tonight either. Earlier, Feng Ling went to the tent next door to check on Fat Tai. Fatty's fever had subsided, but he was still extremely weak. After soaking in the cold water for so long, and being frightened badly, it was likely that he would fall ill again. The other brothers were all watching over him day and night. After confirming that there were no major problems, Feng Ling returned to the tent here. As soon as she came back, she saw Li Nanheng unbuttoning his clothes with one hand and walking to the bathroom wearing only a t-shirt. Feng Ling looked at his back in confusion and called out, "Boss, why are you going to the bathroom? It's not convenient for you to take a bath now. Can't you wash your hair without bathing?" Li Nanheng had always been a neat freak. He could tolerate not showering for a day or two, but not washing his hair was really uncomfortable. Feng Ling followed him to the bathroom door and watched as he buried his head in the sink next to the simple bathroom. He turned on the faucet of the makeshift water pipe with one hand and poured water on his hair with the other. "You're just going to wash it like that? What else?" Because he was bending over, his voice was deeper. It was a little guttural and a little hoarse. He closed his eyes and bent down to the sink. It seemed like he was struggling, but he still insisted on washing. Feng Ling watched for a while. Li Nanheng was pouring water on his head when he heard Feng Ling's footsteps. In the next second, a pair of hands suddenly appeared in the water. She pulled his uninjured hand away and poured some warm water on his hair. He paused for a moment and turned to look at her while he was still bent over. Feng Ling's voice was extremely natural. "It's inconvenient for you. Let me do it." Li Nanheng did not speak. The hand that was about to wash his hair paused in the air and slowly landed on the sink. He placed it on it and did not move again. Although Feng Ling was usually nimble, and although she was thinner than the others, she was definitely a violent person when she trained. But at this moment, her movements were very light. She poured water on his hair and then rubbed it gently. "You're right." Seeing that his hair was almost wet, she turned off the tap and went to the side to get some shampoo. "Boss, my shampoo is not as good as the one you used in the base. Do you mind?" He paused and did not forget to say with his eyes closed, "I used it here when I took a shower the night before yesterday. Do I look like someone who would mind this kind of thing?" Feng Ling rolled her eyes in a direction where he could not see. Of course, she didn't know whether he was this kind of person or not, but who knew if he would dislike other people's toiletries. She did not say anything, squeezed out the shampoo, rubbed it in her palm and then rubbed it on his hair. In this simple and narrow tent in the bathroom under the dim yellow light, the tall and straight man bent down motionlessly, as if he had never been a tough man in front of her before. She stood by his side and carefully washed his hair, her movements light and slow, slightly jerky. However, Feng Ling, who had been trying her best to wash his hair and didn't like to make him feel uncomfortable, had no idea what kind of torture and psychological challenge Li Nanheng was suffering at this moment. The man closed his eyes and lost his vision. In the darkness, all his senses became more acute. He leaned over the sink and felt her soft hands gently rubbing his hair. Occasionally she scratched it. It did not hurt or itch, but it seemed to ignite something silently. Her fingertip fell on the side of her ear, like a small flame. She pressed his scalp, and every touch made his sensitive body tingle. She turned on the tap and began to pour water on his head again, asking as she poured, "Is the water temperature suitable? Is it hot?" The water temperature was very suitable. It was warm and not hot at all. However, as the water slid down his hair and neck, it began to burn. Feng Ling rubbed his hair back and forth, her fingers gently brushing the foam by his ear, and then she combed the hair on his neck. Li Nanheng stood there calmly, but it was as if someone had ignited a flame in his chest, one after another, unable to be extinguished. After washing for a while until the foam on his hair and neck were all washed away, Feng Ling picked up a towel and wiped his hair for him. It's done. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.